show tonight with Nick Vandergraat and myself. And so it's part of the Out of Control with Nick and Joe, but also part of the Joseph Benamy show. As I put on the website earlier today, my show, which normally would be broadcasting at this time between 8 and 9 p.m. Eastern, is actually preempted because we're going to bring you live coverage of the second GOP, that is to say, the Republican presidential debate. What is it? Is it in Kansas? I think it's at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Center or
Up in
Presidential
California,
Library.
right?
And that's Nick. You're hearing him, and you can probably see him too. So, hey, Nick, how's it going?
Great. That library is in California, correct?
Right now that you mention it, it is in
Well,
California.
he was
Yes.
from California, so it would make
Well,
sense.
that's where as an adult, that's where Ronald Reagan was. Later on, I should say, because he moved there from, I think he was from Illinois at first. He was born and raised in Illinois. And he got his start in radio, actually. And it's a very funny story. He, he, he loved sportscasting. He wanted to be a radio sportscaster. So he just got a job at this small backwoods radio station, which was the call letters for were HOME. Interestingly enough.
Really?
Yeah, really. And he got it, and his job was as a sportscaster. He did a few other things in that. But here was the thing, okay? He couldn't attend baseball games because they didn't have the money for that or anything like that, and they didn't have the contract, I guess, to live feed. So what he would do is he would listen to the game on another radio or something along those lines, and then rebroadcast as if he was broadcasting the show, broadcasting the baseball game live. Anyway, but he decided he wanted to head down and give a shot to a screen test in Hollywood. So down he goes to Hollywood, does a screen test, and lo and behold, they sign him to a contract. I can't remember what studio it was, but so that's how he ended up moving down to California. And then, of course, he got into politics. He was an outspoken anti-communist. Was very much
so.
involved in the Screen Actors Guild, but he was involved, which was the Screen Actors Union. I think it still is. There is one that's still the SAG, and he was involved, of course, in ensuring or pressuring or making sure that there was no communist infiltration of that particular union, of which he was the president at one point in time, the head of the union. So, and then that was sort of his start in politics. And when he as his career wound down, because really World War II sort of interrupted a lot of famous actor careers, and after the war, he didn't have any real A roles to play. So except maybe if you want to call it an A role movie, okay, Bedtime for Bonzo, yes. In case you didn't know it, the star of Bedtime for Bonzo, which was an amazing movie. I remember seeing it when I was a kid and not realizing that this was, Ronald Reagan at the time I saw it was the governor of California. So sorry, I know we hadn't planned on doing this, but let me just give you 60 more seconds, okay? After his movie career wound down, he he became the host of a new show, and it was the Westinghouse Play Theater, whatever like that. It was like a play or a drama that was put on TV. I don't recall what network, once a week, and he was the host. He would introduce the show, and as part of this, okay, because it was Westinghouse was the sponsor of this particular show. So he became a spokesperson for Westinghouse, and they had him touring the country, visiting various plants, etc., factories, and giving speeches to the workers and things like that. Sort of rah, yay Westinghouse, right? So from there, he was and he was a Democrat, by the way, a lifelong
At the
Democrat.
time.
until somebody challenged him and said, if you don't like what the Democrats stand for, why don't you quit the party and become a Republican? And he shrugged his shoulders and said, you're right. At least that's the way the story goes. So he quit the Democratic Party, joined the Republicans, and eventually got talked into running for governor in the state of California. Did 2 terms as a Republican, not just a Republican, a conservative Republican governor of California during the most arguably tumultuous time in that ever perennially troubled state during the 1960s, during the Vietnam War, the demonstrations, the anti-war demonstrations, the student sit-ins at Berkeley University, and so he did two terms there, and eventually, of course, ran for president of the United States. Ran as president. He ran the first time he ran was in 1976 in the 1976 primary against a Republican president, Gerald Ford, an incumbent Republican president, and he lost in 1976. And anyway, and then, well, we could go on and on, but that's sort of like the background to it. So here we are, Nick. We've got this presidential debate tonight, and I think it's worthwhile spending a few minutes talking a little bit about some of the current events that are happening here in Canada. But I know you were doing a little bit of background research, so just for our viewers and our listeners, if you don't mind, maybe just take a minute, Nick, if you could, and talk to us a little bit about what the criteria was to actually participate in this debate, because not Ronald Reagan, but Donald Trump has decided not to, even though he met all of the criteria, I assume. But we had at least one uh, participant from the previous debate drop out this time.
Yep.
And that's because he didn't meet the threshold. So
That's
what
right.
exactly was the threshold?
Well, the threshold to qualify for this debate, first of all, Donald Trump wasn't going to participate in this anyway. He's got no reason to. You don't go to a debate when you're that far out in front in the polls, because while you can be the most eloquent person on earth, if you expose yourself to 7 or 8 people, because if you're Donald Trump and you're on the stage, you are the bullseye. Everybody's shooting at you, and you don't want to give them a chance to land some kind of blow that will make it that much more difficult. So he just said, I don't see any reason to participate. I have nothing to gain by being there. So other than him, I'll run a list of candidates, and then I'll tell you what it took to get on the stage. You have Ron DeSantis, who is the current governor of Florida; Tim Scott, he was a congressman and a senator, who I've heard talk before, and is very eloquent. He's by no means is this guy a toss away candidate. You have Nikki Haley, former UN ambassador of the United States to the UN. You've got Vivek Ramaswamy, which is the kind of the surprise horse in all of this. Nobody expected him to do as well as he's doing. He's a private entrepreneur. You have Chris Christie, former governor of New Jersey. Doug, I can never say this right, Herden, he's the North Dakota governor. Mike Pence, former vice president, and Trump and Pence do not like each other at all. And Pence just, anyway, we'll see what happens with tonight. Okay, so that's your field of candidates. To qualify, just to stand on the stage, you had to have 3% in the polls, and you had to have 50,000 unique donors and a certain number, and I didn't find this out till later, but a certain number of them have to come from 20 different states. Okay, so you couldn't just be 50,000 donors from Rhode Island, as an example. Okay, they had to be scattered across the country, which makes sense. So that was the standard for this debate. For the next debate, and obviously, I forget the other guy. Was it Herden? Did I mention Herden? Oh, yeah, he's in there. There's another guy who didn't make the grade after the first one. He won't be there tonight. It was 8 last time. It's 7. This is how they prune them down, because every time the standard goes up. For the next one, to qualify, you have to have 4% support and even more unique donors. Okay, so that's the way that the Americans weed out the also rans, and I think it'll be very interesting tonight to watch three particular people. One will be Ron DeSantis. Number two is Vivek Ramaswamy, and number three would have to be I'm going to throw Nikki Haley in there because she's the only woman on the stage, and she does have a bit of a resume, in international affairs, being the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. You can also, if you really want to have some fun, toss in Tim Scott, who was he came out of, I think it was Georgia, and the son of a sharecropper, and he started off in cotton and ended up in the Congress, and he served in the Congress and the Senate. So he's very articulate, very smart. I like some of the policies I've heard him give in interviews. It'll be interesting to see how, let's call it, those four are going to do. Chris Christie, I don't think stands a chance, and I don't think that Mike Pence. I think the only reason he's running because he really, really, really doesn't like Trump. So there's a bit of personal between them, and he's trying to make Trump's life as difficult. He might surprise us. We don't know. That's the thing about these particular debates. You have no idea how they're going to pan out. But the reason Trump's not there is he sees no reason to expose his jaw to a sharp right hook. So he's going to stay away until he absolutely has to be in one of these debates,
Right.
and that'll be towards the end.
And that makes sense. It's interesting your comments about Mike Pence because I picked up a copy of his autobiography about a year ago, and read it through, and honestly, in his autobiography, which of course was written after the election defeat in 2020 and
Right.
everything that went on with the riot at Capitol Hill and January, what was January 6th? I can't remember now.
Yeah, January 6th. Yep.
January 6th, 2021, and all of those events and that. And the truth is, he continued, even in his autobiography, he still was, very, I think, very praising of Donald Trump and Donald Trump's policies. Where they had the falling out was in whether or not he had the constitutional authority, that is to say, Mike Pence, the constitutional authority, according to the American Constitution, to be able to block the counting and the certification of the votes. Because, as you know, again, for our Canadian listeners, in the United States, when you elect the president to the United States, you actually, in your state, you actually are voting. It's one person, one vote, but the state has electoral college votes. So depending
That's right.
on how it works, some states are winner take all. So let's say, just for the sake of argument, the state of Maine, and the state of Maine, I don't know how many electoral college votes it has, but let's just, for the sake of argument, say it has 10. So in the state of Maine, let's say, if it's a winner take all state, if you happen to win that state, even by one vote, you get all 10 electoral college votes.
That's right.
But other states are split proportionately, so it's really up to the state. And the so this is it's kind of a roundabout way. It's of saying, well, we elect people, our president, through popular vote, but we have this sort of buffer, if you will. And I don't think it's a bad thing. But the way the Constitution of the United States works is that each state assembly has to certify the vote from their own state, and then they send a notice to the Congress, to the Senate in Washington, and they of the certification, and the Senate then certifies the voting. Okay, I'm making it over simple. It's a little more complicated than that, but the bottom line is that Mike Pence, as the vice president, also happens to be the Speaker of the Senate. That's what the Constitution says in the United States, and so there was a very strong feeling that with all of the turmoil that went on, all of the accusations of cheating, etc., that Mike Pence should have been able to say, "Look, I'm not going to allow this certification to come to a vote, and we're going to send all of this stuff back to the individual states, and we're going to ask them to recertify or do whatever the process was in each individual state." And that was really the sort of the genesis of the open conflict between Donald Trump and Mike Pence. Look, I'm going to say some things that are not going to sound very complimentary of Donald Trump, and I apologize for that in advance, because I don't want anybody to think that I'm an anti-Trumper. I'm not an anti-Trumper. I like the man. I like the policies that he implemented. I'm sorry that there were some things that he wanted to do that he was not able to do. I think this is a problem with people coming straight from the private sector into a political situation like President of the United States. They don't understand the kind of restrictions and constraints that a president, let's say, of the United States has to operate under. Ironically, the president of the United States, from a domestic point of view, actually has far less power over the administration than a prime minister in Canada has over his administration or her administration. So, because we don't have the same kind of constitutional constraints and checks and balances that they have in the Constitution in the United States here in Canada. Um, so, where was I going with this? The point I'm making here is I don't like his style. I think it's undignified. I'm an old fashioned. I believe in I have an old fashioned idea that the leader of a country should be setting an example in terms of behavior and dignity and decency. And I think that Donald Trump regrettably fails in that respect. But notwithstanding that, and Mike Pence, if you read his autobiography, when he was offered the opportunity to be vice president, these were concerns, of course, that he had, but he managed them. And he doesn't hide from the fact that these were concerns he had, but he's still very complimentary of Donald Trump, and he even defends him. The rift that has developed between the two of them, I think, is really unfortunate. And I don't think it's really necessary. But again, this is Donald Trump's style. He's a pugnacious, bare knuckle fighter, and he's not afraid he's not afraid of sucker punching people. Let's just put it that way.
Actually, let me loop back a little bit, because when
Yeah,
you're talking about the College of I was going to say the College of Cardinals, the Electoral College, um, I think for, again, the Canadian audience, it's worthwhile explaining what that is and why it exists. Now, as I understand it, it's to make sure no one state, like if you went by just one man, one vote, and first past the post and all these other things, you would have three states determining every time who the president's going to be. You'd have New York, California, and maybe Texas, because of their population base. So you've got three states controlling the destiny of 50.
yeah,
So what you now have with the College of Electoral
electoral
College,
college, right?
yeah. So places like Idaho, Montana, these states that are um, have much less population density, even in their big cities, still have a say, and it
Right,
makes the average vote still count. And I think it's a very important. We have a version of that in Canada, but not quite the same.
right. Well,
But
but I think, sorry to interrupt, Nick, but just I think it's important to bear in mind, though, that while I agree with the general principle that you're outlining, I think that it's important to remember that the states don't all have an equal number of electoral college
no,
votes.
they don't. It's all based on
And the
population.
number of electoral college votes that you have is really based on population. So the big
Yep.
states like California, like New York State, for instance, they still have a lot more electoral college votes than do some of the smaller states. So it's kind of trying to find that sweet spot balance.
Yeah.
But I take the point that you're making. I think it's a very valid point.
Yeah, well, don't forget, even the Americans say that the way they do democracy is an experiment, and it's not concluded yet.
Nick,
And there's always fine tuning to go on.
Nick, the way any of us do democracy is experimental.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I wanted, if we got some time, I'm just looking at the clock, just real fast. This comment, coming back to Canadian politics for a minute, this whole
Right,
Nazi thing in the House of Commons.
right.
Look, nobody likes Nazis.
Of
But
course.
and I certainly don't. Um, One of the most hideous, dark political ideologies ever to grace the planet. Um, but I think what people lose track of is history, a sense of history. If you are living in the Ukraine, the breadbasket of Europe, okay, they one thing they grow a lot of is food. So you've just had Stalin in the 1930s come through, remove all the family farms, all the kulaks, which is where we get the word gulags, um, which were farmers, were taken off the plants, taken off the fields, and this idea that everybody has a job, you'd have factory workers and typists and all that try to work the land. They don't know how. Not only that, they don't have the tools because all those went too. So you have this massive famine. A lot of 6 million Ukrainians died. Six or it was a lot. Like if 6 million, I may be confusing that with Holocaust numbers, but
It
the
was a
point
lot of
is,
people.
it was in the millions, no question. If it
Absolutely.
hadn't been for North America shipping millions of tons of grain, even more people would have died. So you're Ukrainian, you hate Stalin, and over the hill comes these guys wearing little funny crosses on their helmets saying, we don't like them either, and we're going to try and take them out.
Right.
You want to come and help us? Well, don't be surprised if a bunch of them say yes.
Yeah. I
So I'm not condoning the idea that this guy was a not he. There's nothing to say he was a Nazi because even in the press release they say he fought with the Nazis. Okay, well, so did the Romanians, and so did the Italians, and so did the
well,
Estonians, and so did the Dutch, and a whole bunch of other people.
yeah. Look, I discussed this on my podcast. Yes, today's Wednesday. Yesterday, Tuesday podcast. If anyone wants to check it out, www.josephbenamy.com. All one word without the hyphen. And you can see that I discussed this at some length. The history of that region, which I am very familiar with. And the point that you're making is absolutely true. Nobody should be surprised, especially from the Ukraine, because Ukrainians were the population of all of the occupied territories in Europe, Nick. Ukraine was the one that contributed the highest popular proportion, I should say, of volunteers fighting alongside the Nazis, and not only that, uh, they provided in Poland in particular a very large number of auxiliary police, and they volunteered as guards in concentration camps, etc. Now, here's the thing, okay? I'm very sorry, and I pointed this out in my podcast. I'm very sorry that Anthony Rota stepped down under pressure.
Yeah,
I should say.
he took the
Also,
fall.
he took the fall, absolutely. Now, I'm of two minds about it because I have had the opportunity to interact and to work with Anthony Rota many years ago when I was the director of government relations for B'nai B'rith, and I found him to be a very decent, honest, hardworking member of parliament. And it's a lot for me to say that because Anthony Rota
There's
is a
not.
liberal, and of course there are many things that we don't see eye to eye on. But in terms of the guy's integrity and that, I thought he was a good selection for speaker, and I think he did a very good job as the Speaker of the House of Commons. So I was sorry to see him go, but on the other hand, it was a refreshing thing to see. I know he's not a minister, but to see a senior political personality not throwing his staff under the bus. And this was clearly a staff problem because Anthony Rota is not going to vet everybody that comes along. He was briefed on this individual, and he recognized him as he does, or has he speakers do fairly often in the House of Commons. And unfortunately, whoever did the staff work didn't realize that when he was told that this person was a World War II veteran, that he was a World War II veteran fighting on the Nazi side. Now, here's the thing, and this is the point I made in the podcast, okay, and that is, if whoever it was that was doing the briefing knew that he was from Ukraine and knew anything about that region, that would have been a red flag, and he would have wanted to. He would have said, "Oh, he was a World War II veteran. He fought in the war. On which side?" If you were from France, you wouldn't ask that question, even though the French did provide volunteers to the Nazis as well.
Well, every
And as
European
did every occupied country. You were right about that.
Yep.
But Ukraine was a special case, and so if I had been in that position, I would have said, okay, you're a World War II veteran. Which side did you fight on? I wouldn't have asked that if it was Poland or France or
Well, take
Poland
your
or anything
pick.
like that. Even though the Dutchmen and Frenchmen and Danes also did, in smaller numbers, volunteer to fight alongside the Nazis.
Yeah, I think
I was sorry to see. I was sorry to see him step down, but it was there is the positive side of this is he was a shining example of what used to be known as ministerial responsibility. Even though he was not a minister, not a member of the cabinet, but still, you don't see ministers taking responsibility for their staff anymore. What you
well,
hear now is when something goes wrong, a staff person screws up, they get thrown under the bus. And the minister continues to do whatever they're doing. And I think that's really too bad. So,
it
you know,
is.
sorry to see him go, but kudos and congratulations to him, not just for the service that he provided to the House of Commons and the country, but for the example that he has shown of what a true parliamentarian how a true parliamentarian should act under the circumstances.
Well, it was an ugly affair, that's for sure. And you're right. It's a lack of context in the historical perspective that allowed this to happen in the first place.
Nick, I think that all things considered, because we're coming up to now the debate starting
Right.
live, so I think it's wise for us to take a couple of minutes break. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to get up and refresh your drink or stretch your legs or whatever, do that now, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes here, live on the Nick and Joe show, along with our friends at Fox News that will be broadcasting the debate. So stay tuned. We'll be back in a couple of minutes here.
Ice cream. Give me ice cream with whipped cream. Ice cream. Give me ice cream with whipped cream. Ice cream. A million flavors, let's just do it. Tie me up with ice cream. Sunny days need that cold hit. Ice cream. A million flavors, let's just do it. Tie me up with ice cream. Sunny days need that cold hit. That strawberry chocolate taste. Ice cool vanilla for me. Hundreds and thousands. I need an ice cream island. Give me ice cream with whipped cream. Strawberry sauce. And see my face gleam. I need a wafer on top. Just ice cream full stop. So take me to the pudding shop. Ice cream. A million flavors, let's just do it. Tie me up with ice cream. Sunny days need that cold hit. Ice cream. A million flavors, let's just do it. Tie me up with ice cream. Sunny days need that cold hit. That strawberry chocolate.
About what the left and the media say about us.
What is the key to a thriving economy?
It's innovation, not regulation.
America can do for anyone what she's done for me.
We will stop the spending. We will stop the borrowing. We will stop the earmarks.
What is America's role in the world?
We need to build a military fitted to the widening challenges in an ever more dangerous world.
Sometimes you avoid war by showing you're tough.
And the country faces even more challenges. Would Reagan even recognize the country in which we now...
Okay, well, we're back here on the Nick and Joe show, Out of Control, Joseph Ben-Ami show.
Tonight,
And
candidates seeking the Republican nomination converge in California to chart a new path
and
to the
our
grand
feed here is just a little choppy all of a sudden, which it hasn't been
now
all
is
night long. So
the time for choosing.
I just paused it for a second so that we
Let
run
it load
ahead
a little bit.
because I'm thinking it might be a bit of a buffering problem, Nick.
Yeah, it could be.
So anyway, if you're just joining us, welcome to the live broadcast of the second Republican debate for the 2024 presidential election. I'm Joseph Ben-Ami and Nick Vandergraat, my colleague. We are your co-hosts for tonight. We're going to be bringing you not just the live broadcast, but some insight and some commentary along the way. So I'm here sitting in Ottawa, and my friend Nick Vandergraat is sitting in Souk, which is on the west coast of Canada, British Columbia, the left coast, as we like to call it, on Vancouver Island. It's not just the west coast, it's the west coast of the west coast, because he's on the west coast of the island.
That's right. If you go any further west, you're going to get wet.
Anyway, let's. I'm just going to see if we can't pull the feed in again, and hopefully we're going to be out of the buffering problem here. There we go.
Welcome to the second Republican debate of the California. We're inside the spectacular Air Force One pavilion.
It's a 707.
The stage is set for a showdown. I'm Stuart Varney of Fox Business.
Oh, so they are broadcasting from a hangar.
Yeah.
Fox News Channel
Isn't that interesting?
Marine One and U.S. Air,
Univision.
they call it.
Good evening.
Right. Now this hangar must be part of the presidential library.
Undoubtedly.
Right.
As a shining city on a hill, and tonight, 7 candidates will make the case they should be the one to lead that city into a brighter tomorrow. But first, they have to convince you, the voter. Please allow me to welcome our Spanish-speaking audience. Muy buenas noches a todos. Desde la Biblioteca Presidencial Ronald Reagan, los precandidatos republicanos también buscan su voto para las primarias del partido. Bienvenidos.
And good evening. So let's meet the candidates who have qualified and chosen to be on this stage tonight. They are positioned by the order they rank in the polls, with the highest polling candidate in the middle. Standing center stage, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis.
Flanking the governor, entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy.
Vivek Ramaswamy. Love that style. That smile.
Yep.
Do you think he purposely whitens his teeth? I know that's not a very astute political comment, but
Well, I think they all do. They spend this.
President Mike Pence and North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum.
so Hutchison has dropped out. That's interesting.
Yeah, that was the one.
Important to primary voters.
He's not there.
Candidates get 1 minute to answer and 30 seconds to respond if singled out. When their time runs out, we'll all hear this.
Now
We have a lot
I
of
hope
ground
that
to
both
cover,
candidates
so please
and the
keep it
moderators
civilized.
do a better
Let's
job
get
of
going.
having control of this
We
debate
are
than they did in the
this
back,
spacious,
the
sunny
previous
place
one.
tonight, designed
We
to
haven't talked
reflect
about that.
the
Maybe
very
during their
nature and
commercial break, we'll
character
talk
of
a little bit
Ronald
about
Reagan. It's
the
a place that
Let's see how
makes you
this
proud
previous
to be an
debate.
American. Yet today our nation is drowning in division and incivility.
Voters say they dread the 2024 election and find politics exhausting. 2 in 3 Americans think the country is on the wrong track, and 3 in 4 say the economy is not in good shape.
Prices are up 18% since 2020. More than half of the US population has little access to childcare. 85% of Americans say their personal finances are a source of stress.
Americans want to believe a leader who says, "You can follow me. I've got you. Don't worry." President Biden is trying to do that with Bidenomics.
And yesterday, he joined the picket lines where auto workers are demanding more wages and job security. Senator Scott, you recently reacted by praising Ronald Reagan for firing air traffic controllers in the 1980s, saying, "You strike, you're fired." Would you fire thousands of striking auto workers today, Senator?
Obviously, the President of the United States cannot fire anybody in the private sector. However, we should look back at the first bill in Congress under Joe Biden. The first bill had $86 billion for the union pensions because they continue to overpromise yet underdeliver. One of the challenges that we have in the current negotiations is that they want 4-day French work weeks, but more money. They want more benefits, working fewer hours. That is simply not going to stand. I sat in a finance committee hearing when a widow came before the committee who's promised pensions from the unions, $4,000 a month. Unfortunately, it had been cut to $1,000 a month. We must make sure that we honor the commitments that we make, and one of the ways that we do that, do not overpromise and underdeliver and leave the taxpayers on the hook. I'll say this, Joe Biden should not be on the picket line. He should be on the southern border working to close our southern border because it is unsafe, wide open, and insecure, leading to the deaths of 70,000 Americans in the last 12 months because of fentanyl. It is devastating. Every county in America is now a border county because fentanyl has devastated Americans in every single state. I will also say 6 million illegal crossings since Joe Biden has taken office, and he eliminated Title 42. The one thing he should do is finish the wall, reinstate Title 42, and get the job done.
Of course, Biden only spent about 8 minutes on the picket line and then talked about his how he often crossed picket lines.
Right, a guy who spent his whole life in the Senate.
Mr. Ramaswamy, you've said you really empathize with the strikers. You're standing next to Senator Scott. Do you agree with what he said, or do you think he's wrong?
I agree with some of what he said, for sure. I like the spirit of it. I'll say that I don't have a lot of patience for the union bosses. I think that's where he and I actually have a common view. I do have a lot of sympathy for the workers, however. People are going through real hardship in this country. I've been through hardship growing up. My father stared down layoffs at GE under Jack Welch's tenure at the GE plant in Evendale, Ohio. My mom had to work overtime in nursing homes in Southwest Ohio to make ends meet and pay off our home loan. So I understand that hardship is not a choice. But victimhood is a choice, and we choose to be victorious in the United States of America. You know what, if I was giving advice to those workers, I would say go picket in front of the White House in Washington, D.C. That's really where the protest needs to be. Disastrous economic policies that have driven up prices, that have driven up interest rates and mortgage rates, at the same time wages remaining stagnant. What we need is to deliver economic growth in this country, unlock American energy, drill, frack, burn coal, embrace nuclear energy, put people back to work by no longer paying them more money to stay at home, stabilize the U.S. dollar itself, and rescind a majority of those unconstitutional federal regulations that are hampering our economy. That is how we unleash American exceptionalism.
Well, that's a good
And that's
answer.
not a Democratic vision.
I think it's a
or
brilliant
Republican
answer.
vision. That is an American vision that we embrace economic growth, and capitalism is still the best system known to man to lift us up from poverty, and we should not apologize for it. That's what it means to be an American.
Okay, I could buy that. That was a good answer.
I think Reagan would have liked that guy.
Together, the CEOs of General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis make 336 times the number of rank and file workers.
Oh dear.
That's just
Here
part
we go.
of a wider income inequality trend in the country. The richest 1% now controls 1/5 of all
Oh,
income.
come on,
Vice
Stuart.
President Pence.
Let him
last
ask
week
the
you
question.
said
Let's see what the
you
answer is.
side with American workers, but you also support how these companies operate. Which is it?
Well, thank you for the question. I want to thank Univision and Fox Business for assembling such a wonderful forum. Look, I do disagree with something Tim Scott just said. Joe Biden doesn't belong on a picket line. He belongs on the unemployment line.
Okay, that's a good line.
I'm from the second leading manufacturing state in the country per capita. I was governor of the state of Indiana. We brought 12,000 factories back to America during our administration. I know something about manufacturing. And I got to tell you, while the union bosses are talking about class warfare and talking about disparity in wages, I have to tell you, I really believe what's driving that is Bidenomics has failed. Wages are not keeping up with inflation. Auto workers and all American workers are feeling it, and families are struggling in this economy. And Joe Biden's Green New Deal agenda is good for Beijing and bad for Detroit. We ought to repeal the Green New Deal, get rid of the mandates and subsidies that are driving American gasoline automotive manufacturing into the graveyard. And beyond that also, as President of the United States, I'll be standing with workers all across America, and I'll be standing for the right to work of every American to join a union or not join a union as they decide.
Senator Scott, you were mentioned. Will you care to
I
respond?
really like that last part.
Yeah, but he didn't really answer the question, and that's too
I look
bad.
forward to being the next president of the United States. I will also say, I know America can do for anyone what she's done for me. It's why we're focusing on restoring hope, creating opportunities, and protecting the America we all love. Growing up in a single-parent household, I wondered if the American dream would work for a kid in the inner city. I've got good news for every single child, whether you're in the inner cities of Chicago or the rural parts of Iowa. America and the dream, it is alive, it is well, and it is healthy. God bless these United States of America.
Governor Haley, you raise your hand.
I think we need to look at exactly what happened. Biden showed up on that picket line, but why are those workers actually there? It's because of all of the spending that he has pushed through in the economy that's raised the inflation. So when you look at the fact that we are paying higher gas prices, higher grocery prices,
But that's not really the
more a year
reason
for
that they're on the
families,
picket
what we
line. This
need
is
to
an
do is I
annual
came out with
thing.
an economic plan,
The
eliminate the gas
United
and
Auto
diesel
Workers
tax so that
target
they have
one
more
of the
money in their
manufacturers
pocket.
every
Let's
year
focus on
for job
going
action.
after middle America
I'm
and
not
cutting
sure.
taxes for middle
I
America
mean,
and
this is
collapsing
going to
those
sound
brackets.
unfortunate
Let's get rid
again.
of unfair
I'm not
distortions
sure
like the
how
state and
much
local
the auto
tax
workers are
that they
hurting
give to
economically.
wealthy
I mean, they
people
get
in blue
they're
states
paid
and not
pretty good,
paid by red states. And let's
you
make
know, with
sure we
good
make the
benefits and
small
stuff like
business
that. So
taxes permanent. They only made
The
those
question
temporary.
becomes-
They made the corporate
let's
taxes
not
permanent.
put them in the same
Let's focus
category
on
as
what it takes to get
the
more
stock,
cash in the
the people
pockets of
shelving the
workers.
stock
That's when we'll be
in the
able to deal
local
with strikes
grocery
like this,
store.
not
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
sitting on a picket line.
Oh dear. Now we're having that buffering problem again.
That's a fluff answer. There's some truth in it, of course, but your point about this is an annual event is well taken. The question is, how long can that continue? Because no matter if you squeeze an orange, there's only so much juice in it. And one of the reasons why a lot of manufacturers, even auto manufacturers, are relocating to other jurisdictions is because lower taxes, let's face it, lower wage demands, untenable environmental laws. When you add that all up, you've got a witch's brew, and they look around and say, "Where's a better place to do business?"
Well, that's true, Nick. But at the same time, okay, let's remember not only are auto workers, the members of the auto workers union, well paid, they have
Yeah, they are.
jobs. Not plus, right now, our governments, both here in Canada and south in the United States, are spending billions and billions of dollars in subsidies to provide more work for auto workers on electric vehicles and electric vehicle components. Let's return to the debate.
Questions to get to about economy. Allow me to.
I just have to. I'm sorry.
Allow me to.
I'm sorry. I have to jump in because we're missing the point, and every other network is missing the point. The reason why people are striking in Detroit is because Joe Biden's interference with capital.
I'm not sure why
Markets, and we're free markets.
This is obviously, at least this first round of questions is just an opportunity to shoot at Joe Biden.
Well, they're all going to do that, Nick.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, we're just going to let this catch up a little bit. We're having a bit of a buffering problem, ladies and gentlemen. I apologize for that. But when they go for a break, we'll see if we can't fix that. But before we catch up again, I mean, the fact is, Nick, that it's well, first of all, they're all doing what they're supposed to do, and that is pivoting to answer the question that they want to, and they're all going to try to present themselves as being the anti-Biden and that. But again, switching back to the state of the auto workers in particular, with all due respect to the auto workers, members of the UAW, they, again, as I said, they're very well taken care of. They have great wages, okay? They have great benefits, and they also have the added benefit of the government stepping in order to provide massive subsidies now to try to convert the auto industry off of fossil fuel powered cars, gasoline powered cars, into the electric car market. So I guess I'm always a little troubled when I hear people talking about the poor auto workers, okay, when there are people sleeping in their cars in the local Walmart parking lot.
Yeah.
So it's a different thing. And let's remember this, okay, that Joe Biden went to stood on that picket line for 8 minutes. Okay, that's not picketing. That's not joining them in their picket. It was a photo op, nothing more, nothing less. And I wish that I was hearing them say that rather than just blaming their economy. Sure, the economy is bad. Sure, the rules and regulations under the Biden administration are problematic. But just as a matter of principle, of just integrity, Joe Biden, he wanted to go there just because it was a photo op.
Look, you're absolutely right. And I'm not trying to say that under any circumstances that the auto workers, be they in Canada or the United States, are have some massive grievance to solve. It's getting to a point now where the demands border on the ridiculous. I could sit here and tell you a couple of stories that just make your hair curl about how much work they don't have to do and how much more they get paid for doing it. It's just, and this goes back into the 90s when Go ahead.
I was just going to say, let's go back to the debate now.
Automakers, and we're subsidizing the cars, and a particular kind of car, not every car. We're subsidizing electric vehicles. And when you decide that we're going to take all of your taxpayer monies, take $1 billion, subsidize a certain type of vehicle, and the batteries come from China. China controls 85% of the rare earth minerals. They're called rare earth because they're measured in parts per million. China is moving 100,000 pounds of earth in Indonesia, in Africa. They're literally destroying the planet so that they can make a battery that's in a car subsidized here. That's why they're striking, because they need 2/3 less workers to build an electric car. Joe Biden, this strike is at Joe Biden's feet.
That was a good line.
It was.
The follow question to Governor Christie. The government will shut down if Congress does not reach a deal by the end of this week. Vice President Pence warns that politics of, quote, Trump's populist proteges, like Mr. Ramaswamy, are a road to ruin for the GOP. If the government shuts down, should voters blame populist Republicans?
Voters should blame everybody who's in Washington, D.C. They get sent down there to do the job, and they've been failing at doing the job for a very long time. And let's be honest about this with the voters. You know, during the Trump administration, they added $7 trillion. $7 trillion in national debt. And now the Biden administration has put another $5 trillion on and counting. They have failed, and they're in the spot they're in now because none of them are willing to tell the truth. None of them are willing to take on the difficult issues. They just want to keep kicking the can down the road. And the inflation that Nikki spoke about is absolutely right, and it's caused by government spending. And that's why people all across this country are suffering tonight. And yet we don't get any answers because Joe Biden hides in his basement and won't answer as to why he's raising the debt the way he's done. And Donald Trump
4 years
hides
late on
behind
that
the
one.
walls of his golf clubs and won't show up here to answer questions like all the rest of us are up here to answer. He put $7 trillion on the debt. He should be in this room to answer those questions for the people you talk about who are suffering. And if the government closes, it's the blame. It is to the blame of everyone in Washington, D.C., who has failed to do their job and just plays to the grandstand.
The next question is for Governor DeSantis.
Here's how we get it done in Washington. We must find a way.
Can we please respect the time?
We can get it done.
Governor DeSantis, you haven't spoken. Please.
The people in Washington are shutting down the American dream with their reckless behavior. They borrowed, they printed, they spent, and now you're paying more for everything. They are the reason for that. They have shut down our national sovereignty by allowing our border to be wide open. So please spare me the crocodile tears for these people. They need to change what's going on. And where's Joe Biden? He's completely missing in action from leadership. And you know who else is missing in action? Donald Trump is missing in action. He should be on this stage tonight. He owes it to you to defend his record where they added $7.8 trillion to the debt. That set the stage for the inflation that we have now. I can tell you this, as governor of Florida, we cut taxes, we ran surpluses, we've paid down over 25% of our state debt, and I vetoed wasteful spending when it came to my desk. And as your president, when they send me a bloating spending bill that's going to cause your prices to go up, I'm going to take out this veto pen and I'm going to send it right back to them.
Ilya, you mentioned me in the question. I just want to address that.
I'm going to stop, but I have a question that is on the minds of a lot of moms and dads and Americans, and I know that you've been thinking about it because child care costs, they are up. They're topping $10,000 per month. Some families are spending up to half of their income on child care, and they're having to decide, is it worth it for me to work, or does it not make sense for me financially? In 3 days, the billions of dollars in pandemic-era funding is going to end, and 70,000 daycares could close. So you had an effort to broaden eligibility for child care assistance. That fell apart last year. And for the moms and dads out there who are worried, what can you tell them if you weren't able to get it through the Congress? How could you do it as president?
Certainly one of the things I did as a member of Congress was to make sure that we protected the Head Start programs around the country, giving people the opportunity to pick and choose the place that they send their children. The challenges that we see today under the Biden administration is that the cost for daycare has gone over $15,000 per child. In the Build Back Broker plan, he called it a Build Back Better plan, it was going up to $29,000. The way we fix that problem is to make sure that we actually cut taxes and give more Americans their money back.
I don't agree with that.
The
way you fix that problem, Nick, is you get out of the child care business and let the private sector take care of it.
Fine, but I like the last line, cut taxes.
Okay, cut taxes, but taxes aren't the reason why child care costs are going up. Child care costs are going up because the government is running basically all of these child care spaces. Certainly that's the case in Canada.
It's not just child care you could do that with. There's all kinds of different things going on. Like, why are electric cars being so heavily subsidized? Nobody wants them.
Yeah, you're right. It's an across-the-board problem.
This artificial division is unhelpful in our party. The real divide is not between the Republicans on this stage. And in the Reagan Library, I want to say these are good people on this stage. The real divide is between the majority of us in this country who love the United States of America and share our founding ideals. free speech, meritocracy, the idea you get ahead in this country not on the color of your skin, but on the content of your character, and the fringe minority in the Democrat Party that has a chokehold over that party. That's the real divide.
Right.
So this populist versus classical debate is artificial. We need to unite this party.
Can I speak about the administration?
We are going to talk about immigration and the border.
Child care. We have
I think we're going to go on. You have to. We have all these questions. We're going to get to you. We're going to come back to you. There's a lot of time.
We're about child care. Nobody answered the question. In North Dakota, we knew that the cliff was coming. We knew that there was going to be millions of people without it. And so guess what? We planned.
See, this is I don't like this, and this was a characteristic of the previous, the first debate. Nobody.
Well, look, guys like
just
him.
not respecting the rules.
1984, President Ronald Reagan said the following.
The idea of amnesty for those who have put down roots and who have lived here, even though sometime back they may have entered illegally.
2 years later, President Reagan granted amnesty to nearly 3 million immigrants, something no Democrat or Republican president has done since. Governor Christie, as governor of a non-border state in 2010, you supported a path to citizenship. But when you ran for president in 2016, you flipped, saying immigrants should be tracked like FedEx packages. Where do you stand now on a path to citizenship for 11 million of undocumented immigrants?
Well, the problem is that since no one has done anything since we first had this discussion 13 years ago, we're not in a position to be able to do any of that anymore. What we have to do now is first treat this like the law enforcement problem it is. Our laws are being broken every day at the southern border, every day. And Joe Biden and his crew is doing nothing about enforcing that law. They are letting it go. And by the way, they announced during the presidential race they were going to let it go. And we need to have a president who acts like I did as governor, enforce the law first and foremost. And that means what I'll do on day one is sign an executive order to send the National Guard to partner with Customs and Border Patrol to make sure that we stop the flow of fentanyl over the border, but also to make sure that we send a much different message.
The National Guard is controlled by the individual states, isn't it?
Vacant jobs we have.
Well, they belong to the states, but they can be activated by the federal government. Yeah.
If you come here illegally, we will apprehend you and we will send you back across the border from which you came. And the fact is that until we set a law and order agenda in this country, not only now but in the future, we won't be able to continue this. And I'll tell you this. Donald Trump failed on this as well. He said he was going to build a wall across the whole border. He built 52 miles of wall and said Mexico would pay for it. Guess what? I think if Mexico knew that he was only going to build 52 miles, they might have paid for the 52 miles.
Thank you, Governor.
All right, Governor Haley.
That's a good line.
Immigrants are coming from countries south of the border. You've seen the Fox News drone. It's captured this steady stream of people coming into the country on a daily basis. In fact, I believe we have a live picture of it tonight. That is happening right now, live. In the last decade, the U.S. has spent nearly $55 billion to address the root causes of migration. But crime, poverty, and corruption, they persist, and the number of migrants is only growing. Are we wasting our money?
Well, what happens is when Joe Biden waved the green flag, it told everybody to come. And now we've seen 6 million people cross the border. We've had more fentanyl that have killed Americans in the Iraq, Vietnam, or Afghanistan wars combined. We need to make sure that we are a country of laws. The second we stop being a country of laws, we give up everything this country was founded on. So we have to secure the border. The way we do that is, first of all, defund sanctuary cities. You see what's happening in Philadelphia right now. It's got to stop. We need to make sure we put 25,000 more Border Patrol and ICE agents on the ground and let them do their job. I spent 400 miles down that border, and I'm telling you, Border Patrol agents aren't allowed to do their job. Let's go back to remain in Mexico policy. Instead of catch and release, let's go to catch and deport.
What about what about the aid that federal taxpayers are paying to deal with the root causes? It's not working?
The only aid that we should be spending right now is to secure the border, the southern border, the northern border, period.
You would cut
we
off
need
aid
to
to the
keep
region?
Americans safe, and right now Americans are not safe. Only when we fix the immigration system, only when we get the border secure, should we ever look at putting any more money into this. Our money should be about keeping Americans safe. We're not doing that. Joe Biden's not doing that. And you mentioned Congress and shutting down government. I'll make it clear. We have to change the budget process in 4 years. In 40 years. Congress has only delivered a budget on time 4 times in 40 years. If they don't keep the government open, they should not get paid. No pay, no budget. That's the way we should have it.
I think she meant no budget, no pay. But
I think that's what you meant, yeah.
China invested $12 billion in Latin America just last year. They signed strategic partnerships with 7 countries, including Mexico. And China's military ties to the region now include arms sales and training exercises. Are you comfortable with China deepening ties with our southern neighbors?
Of course not. And the reason why we're in this mess is because elites in D.C. for far too long have chosen surrender over strength when it comes to the CCP. Some people in our country got rich, our industrial base got hollowed out, and they have been able to build the second most powerful military in the entire world. We need a totally new approach to China. We are going to have real hard power in the Indo-Pacific, like Reagan, to deter their ambitions. We're going to have economic independence from China, where we're decoupling our economy, and we are going to go after the cultural power they have in this country. As governor of Florida, I banned the CCP from buying land in our state. We should do that all across these United States. We shouldn't have them in our universities. We shouldn't have Confucius Institutes. So you see a country in decline, our power's in decline. China's going to surpass us this decade, and if they do that, that's going to affect every single American household. As your president, I am not going to let that happen. I'm going to reverse this country's decline. We are going to choose strength, not surrender when it comes to the CCP.
America is not a country in decline. Under Joe Biden, we are a country in retreat.
You proposed, quote, universal deportation for all undocumented immigrants and their children, even if the children are citizens of the United States. Under what legal premise will you expel U.S. citizens?
So the first thing I want to say is I agree with everything. The Republicans on the stage are on the right side of this issue. Militarize the southern border, stop funding sanctuary cities, and end foreign aid to Mexico and Central America to end the incentives to come across. But I do go a step further. You're right about that, Ilya. I favor ending birthright citizenship for the kids of illegal immigrants in this country. Now, the left will howl about the Constitution and the 14th Amendment. The difference between me and them is I've actually read the 14th Amendment. What it says is that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the laws and jurisdiction thereof are citizens. So nobody believes that the kid of a Mexican diplomat in this country enjoys birthright citizenship. Not a judge or legal scholar in this country will disagree with me on that. Well, if the kid of a Mexican diplomat doesn't enjoy birthright citizenship, then neither does the kid of an illegal migrant who broke the law to come here. And as the father of 2 sons, it is hard for me to look them in the eye and say, you have to follow the law when our own government fails to follow its own laws. That's how we really go the distance and solve this problem and restore
I
law
think that
in the
that's a
United States of
misrepresentation
America,
of the 14th Amendment, by the way. But it's an interesting answer.
It is, and it also raises some interesting questions.
Yeah, there's no doubt the fact that when you think of the Constitution and the 14th Amendment, it was certainly written as it relates to slavery, not as it relates to illegal immigration. It's been applied to illegal immigration. So the challenge that we face is, in fact, one that has to do with whether or not the people that come here are under the jurisdiction of our laws. And frankly, if you come here illegally, you are not. Now, surviving a Supreme Court argument is something I can't tell you. But from a perspective of the Constitution, I think it's simple that clearly it was designed for slavery and not for illegal immigration. I'll go one step further, though. When we have a conversation about the things that are happening on this stage, we think about the fact that Vivek just said we were all good people, and I appreciate that because last debate, he said we were all bought and paid for. And I thought about that for a little while and said, you know, I can't imagine how you could say that knowing that you were just in business with the Chinese Communist Party and the same people that funded Hunter Biden millions of dollars was a partner of yours as well. It's not nonsense.
So look, here's what I want to respond. These are good people who are tainted by a broken system, and it's not the fault of anybody who's involved.
Some of us are tainted.
Excuse me. Thank you for speaking while I'm interrupting. While I'm speaking.
Well, you said Biden faithful.
If I may finish.
This is turning into a cockfight.
It's still not as bad as the first debate was, I have to tell you, though.
I didn't see the first one, so.
Everybody knows that.
If I may address
on holding Joe Biden accountable. That's what we need to be.
Okay, while they're all talking over one another, let's talk over them. I just want to say this about Tim Scott, that I was impressed with that answer. Okay, just a second. I want to hear what
we opened a subsidiary in China.
Yeah, go ahead.
But you know what I did that was different than every other company? We got the hell out of there. And when I started my next company, Strive, right when that's years ago. Right when I started my next company, Strive, to compete against BlackRock. Excuse me. To compete against BlackRock, I made a commitment that we would never do business in China. And I will say something.
Yes. I think you have more than time to explain your point.
Well, if I was interrupted by a lot of people here, and I want to be respectful because I believe these are good people, but I do not believe in these. We're sitting here in the Reagan Library.
Yes, I wish you
in
did not think it was midnight
of Ronald Reagan's library, if I may.
Shut up, Scott.
From one admirer of Ronald Reagan to another. From one admirer of Reagan to another, we cannot
do deals with the
violate
4 years ago.
This isn't productive.
I want to hear about that.
Let's have a policy debate.
What's going on?
Let us have a policy debate. Let's have about their record.
Okay, the moderator's got to shut this down.
Well, you see, but how do you do that without shutting down the microphones?
Well, if that's what it takes to get them to quit, so they can breathe and talk to each other.
Status of 600,000 dreamers in the hands of the courts. Dreamers work and they pay taxes. As president, if the Supreme Court ends DACA, would you work with Congress to reach a permanent solution for dreamers?
Well, first let me say I'm glad Vivek pulled out of his business deal in 2018 in China. That must have been about the time he decided to start voting in presidential elections. So we're asked to have you participate in elections. So let me speak to this. Number one, I negotiated the Remain in Mexico policy with the Mexican government. We used economic power to bring the Mexican government to the table. We built hundreds of miles of border wall, and despite what's said here today, we reduced illegal immigration and asylum abuse by 90%. And as President of the United States, I can do it again. The truth is we need to fix a broken immigration system, and I'll do that as well. But first and foremost, a nation without borders is not a nation. And we have to secure the southern border of the United States of America. I know how to do it, and we will do it again. Let me say one other thing about China. Let me say one other thing about China.
Would you negotiate with Congress to give a solution to the problem that dreamers have right now? They are on a limbo.
Well, let me tell you, I served in Congress for 12 years, although it seemed longer. But, you know, something I've done different than everybody else.
That's a laugh line. It didn't work.
Is I've actually secured reform in Congress. You know, Ron, you talk a really good game about cutting spending, but you've increased spending in Florida by 30%. When I was a member of Congress in 2006, right after Hurricane Katrina, Dana, you remember it, we stood our ground. I led House conservatives. We cut $100 billion out of the federal budget. It can be done, but as I said in the last debate, I'll say again, this is no time for on-the-job training. I'm going to be ready on day one to get Congress to step up, secure the southern border of the United States, build a military...
Okay, well, you know, I like Mike Pence, but he absolutely refused to answer that question.
Of course he did. I don't even know what dreamers are.
Other side of this break, and I propose to go to a break. How will these candidates make America safer as rising crime plagues our cities? Debate night continues in moments.
Yeah, it's been interesting so far.
It has been. A couple of quick points, Nick, that I want to raise, and that is just on two issues. First of all, somebody said, I think it actually was Barney who said that Ronald Reagan had basically said, if you strike, you're fired. Actually, he didn't. The air traffic controllers that got fired actually were on strike. but it was an illegal strike because they didn't have the right to strike. And so what
Right.
he did was he said, "You have 48 hours to report back to work," and he only fired the ones that didn't come back. So it was not a preemptive thing. The second thing I want to say is I like Tim Scott, and I wish I the thing that really frustrates me about him is he's over prepared for these debates. I think he's been over prepared. What he does is he ends up in a situation where he's basically he's talking in cliches,
You talking about Mike Pence?
lines and stuff like that. But that last exchange before he got into the tit for tat arguing with Ramaswamy, um, uh, it was good. He was speaking extemporaneously, and when he speaks extemporaneously without the cliches and the rehearsed lines and trying to get that soundbite in, he's very good. And I wish I wish that he was not as over prepared as I think that they've made him. His
You're
handler,
talking about you're talking about Tim Scott, right?
correct? Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think he's a lot better when he's allowed to be more of himself and pivot on the balls of his feet
exactly.
rather than working off a teleprompter. Now, I don't see any teleprompters in those
No, of
shots.
course
They've
he's
got
not.
notes, and
He's rehearsed his lines,
precisely.
and they all have. But he comes across a lot less genuine than the others have. Maybe he's not as practiced, whatever, I don't know. But when he speaks off the cuff, he's very good.
Yeah, I did like him when I saw him interviewed by different media outlets because of that particular fact. And I think tonight, based on what I've seen so far, if you want to hang the label winner on any one of them, it's the individual on the stage who's going to appear the most genuine,
Right,
with the ability to respond without notes from their heart and be just honest with the audience.
right,
And that's how I'm looking at this, and we'll see where they are. People are crying for real leadership, not scripted stuff some staffer wrote.
right. I also we're going to get back into this in just a second in another half a minute or something. But I know there are a lot of people out there on our side of the political spectrum that are going to disagree with what I have to say here. But I actually like Chris Christie. I think he's willing to talk about the issues. I like the way he delivers his lines. He sounds genuine, etc. I know that there are issues with him, and I know that particularly if you're a pro-Trumper, you probably don't like Chris Christie because Chris Christie spends an inordinate amount of time criticizing Donald Trump and the
Right.
Trump administration. But having said that, I do still like him. And I'm not saying I would vote for him, but I do like him. Let's bring the debate back online now.
Okay. Yeah.
And welcome back to the Reagan Library for the second Republican presidential debate. I do want to just remind everyone, there's 1 minute for questions, 30 seconds for a follow-up, and the more you mention each other, that means the fewer questions you're going to get. Okay, so we want to talk about crime. This has been a horrendous problem in our country. The Fox News and others have been covering it. Governor Christie, crime in major cities is striking fear into the hearts of Americans. Just last night, looters took over the streets of Philadelphia. You said in the last debate that you would use U.S. attorneys to prosecute crimes local prosecutors won't.
It's not just in Philadelphia
as
either.
well, and they could not handle all of the lawlessness, the shoplifting, all the carjackings, the armed robberies. They're all surging. Progressive prosecutors were elected by their constituents, and they can't be fired by a president. So what would you do to end the revolving door of criminality?
Well, look, Dana, I'm the only one on this stage who's done it. For 7 years, I ran the 5th largest office in this country at the U.S. Attorney's Office in New Jersey, and we set records for the number of prosecutions that we brought that still have not been broken. And the reason was that we went after the crime that was affecting people's lives. And as president, I will appoint an attorney general and instruct that attorney general that you are to put all the resources that are necessary to bring our cities back under control. The fact is, they will be stretched. There's no doubt about that, but that's what they take the job for, because they love the idea of enforcing the law. We've got to bring law and order back to this country, and not just in our cities. but we need law and order back everywhere. We need law and order back in our suburbs. People are threatened there. We need it in our rural areas. People feel threatened there. And we need it in Washington, D.C. also. And Donald Trump should be here to answer for that, but he's not. And I want to look at that camera right now and tell you, Donald, I know you're watching. You can't help yourself. I know you're watching. Okay? And you're not here tonight.
He's right. He's absolutely right.
And not because of your indictments. You're not here tonight because you're afraid of being on the stage and defending your record.
No, I don't think that's true.
And let me tell you what's going to happen. You keep doing that, no one up here is going to call you Donald Trump anymore. We're going to call you Donald Duck.
All right.
Oh, those are fighting words.
That's.
Prosecutors in your state, but as governor,
They're not going to. He's
Donald Trump would have been better than Donald Duck.
Yeah, but he probably didn't have somebody smart enough to write that line, or brave enough.
Commit another crime.
Well, the crime in these cities is one of the strongest signs of the decaying of America. We can't be successful as a country if people aren't even safe to live in places like Los Angeles and San Francisco. Just being in Southern California over the last couple of days, my wife and I have met 3 people who have been mugged on the street, and that would have never happened 10 or 20 years ago. In Florida, we back the blue. We support the men and women of law enforcement. They are keeping us safe. We have a 50-year low in the crime rate. And yes, when I had 2 progressive prosecutors that weren't following the law in Florida, I removed them from their posts, and the people of Florida are safer as a result of it. As president, I will use the Justice Department to bring civil rights cases against all of those left-wing Soros-funded prosecutors. We're not going to let them get away with it anymore. We want to reverse this country's decline. We need to choose law and order over rioting and disorder.
On a related subject, Governor Haley, there's a nationwide policing shortage. Retirements are up. Recruitment is in the tank, and morale is at a record low. 3 years ago, you signed a pledge to support law enforcement. Now, pledges are a nice idea, but what's your actual plan to get more police on our streets?
Well, and I actually did it in South Carolina, too. You know, what we knew in South Carolina was you take care of those who take care of you. We have to start taking care of law enforcement, but it's not just taking care of them with words. It's making sure that you also follow through on what they do. Right now, we have a lot of stolen guns on the street. Well, these law enforcement officers, they arrest these people, and then they go and they're let out the very next day. So law enforcement feels like they don't, no one has their back.
Sound familiar?
We have to start prosecuting
it's a real problem here in Canada as well.
We have to make sure we have the backs of law enforcement, and we have to make sure that we're a country of law and order. But I want to go back to China because I don't think we spent enough time on that. Right now, we have to look at what government's doing to hurt us against China, too. You have a company, U.S. Antibiotics, that produces amoxicillin, the #1 antibiotic that we need. And right now, there is a company in Bristol, Tennessee, that produces that. Yet our federal government only gets it from China. We need to be focusing on companies that produce in America and supporting those companies that produce in America, not companies that are helping China.
Governor, we will be talking foreign policy later. Delia?
Yes, thank you, Stuart. We're going to stay in the topic of crime because it affects all of us. Governor Burgum, for the first time ever, a Univision poll found that mass shootings and gun safety are one of the most important issues for Latino voters. Mental health concerns are not unique to the United States, but gun violence is.
No, it's
not.
not.
What is your specific plan to curb gun violence?
Well, first we need to understand is I think that the liberal left seems to be just completely bent on prosecuting law-abiding citizens that are gun owners, because every solution they have to this is take away the Second Amendment rights of Americans, and somehow that's going to solve the problem. But all these cities that we're talking about that you showed the videos of tonight, they have some of the strictest gun laws in the country. So we know that that's not what's working. What we have to do is get back to the core issues about the family. We have to get back to behavioral health and mental health. We've got to get back to actually enforcing the laws these people talked about. And like we've done in North Dakota, where we've got the goal and we're on the track to being the most military-friendly state in the nation. We've got the most military and the most support of what we're doing in terms of law enforcement, because the morale is down because we've been defunding the police, because they've been attacked in the press. The police have become the bad guys when they're the one. There's all these jobs available in America. Why would you be a policeman if people don't even respect them? Every time I see a policeman, the first thing I say is thank you. And so does everybody else else in my family and most of the people in our state, because they know we have to respect the people that are out there defending us every single day.
Can I answer the question on mass shooting?
Mr. Ramaswamy, according to Customs and Border Protection, about 90% of fentanyl is seized at official border crossings, and 57% of the smugglers are U.S. citizens. How would you stop fentanyl brought into the country, mostly by U.S. citizens, through ports of entry?
There's two sides to this, and we have to be very honest about it. One is we do have to seal that southern border. Building the wall is not enough. They're building cartel-financed tunnels underneath that wall. Semi-trucks can drive through them. We have to use our own military to seal the Swiss cheese of a southern border. But we also have to be honest. There's a demand-side problem in this country, too, a mental health epidemic. I met family in Iowa, two parents, Kathy and Derek. They lost their son, Sebastian, 17 years old. He bought Percocet on Snapchat, and then he died. Why did he die? Because it was laced with fentanyl. That is closer to bioterrorism, not a drug overdose. That is poisoning. So it is our job to make sure that never happens. But it's also our job to make sure that 17-year-olds don't turn to Percocet via Snapchat. We have to bring back mental health care in this country, not with pump-in pharmaceuticals, but with faith-based approaches that restore purpose and meaning in the next generation of Americans. Many of them are getting it through social media. And this isn't a Republican point or a Democrat point, but if you're 16 years old or under, you should not be using an addictive social media product, period. This is something that we can both agree on, and we can revive both the mental health of this country while stopping the fentanyl epidemic that will kill more people this year than who died on 9/11, and I refuse to be a passive bystander sitting in the White House like the hollowed out husk of a current president we have. We will step up and address this problem to stand for Americans and our children.
Quit encouraging TikTok. Quit encouraging TikTok.
That is why, everything he said I agree with. That is why, as Commander-in-Chief, I'm going to use the U.S. military to go after the Mexican drug cartels. They are killing our people. And the stories that I've seen in Florida, we had an infant, 18 months. Parents rented an Airbnb. And apparently the people that had rented it before were using drugs. The infant was crawling, the toddler was crawling on the carpet and ingested fentanyl residue and died. Are we just going to sit here and let this happen, this carnage happen in our country? I am not going to do that. So I guarantee you on day one, this border is going to be a day one issue for me as president. We're going to declare it a national emergency. Yes, we'll build the wall. We'll do remain in Mexico. But those Mexican drug cartels are going to be treated like the foreign terrorist organizations that they are.
President Pence. All right, Vice President Pence. We're going to move on to a different issue. Hold on, sir. Vice President Pence. Just last month, Vice President Pence, you said if elected, you would repeal all Obamacare mandates. However, you also made that same promise in 2016. And at that time, Trump-Pence had congressional
Oh, we just had a freeze again.
majorities for at least the
Here
first.
we are. Okay, it's buffering again.
Yeah, that's okay. Well, we'll just hold it for a second and we'll get back. Good opportunity to step in here. I'm not. I'm glad that both the last two answers touched on what I consider to be actually the real problem, and that is the breakdown of the family, the breakdown of social mores, the wholesale abandonment of any sense of personal responsibility, personal morality amongst so many people. And it's like Edmund Burke pointed out, people being people, human beings being human beings, they require some degree of government. If you want to have a free society, you have to have a moral society. You have to have a society where people are depending on themselves to police themselves as individuals. They know right from wrong, and they choose to do right because it's the right thing, not because they're afraid of being punished by the police and by the courts and by the government. And that's what's missing. I think that so much of the different problem we're having, not just in the United States, but here in Canada as well, Nick, and throughout the Western world, well, let's call them Western countries, is this small L liberal abandonment of the whole notion that there's such a thing as objective morality, and that and it's the hostility that the leadership of the liberal movement has to any attempt to inculcate our children, to raise our children in an environment where they are actually taught objective morality and they respect it and they practice it themselves.
Yeah, look, when Vivek Ramaswamy said that, we have to get back to the family traditional values, things like faith and so on, he's the first one I've ever heard from the stage in the last decade even mention that. It's always some other government program. It's always, they try to narrow it down to one little thing they think they can do, when the problem, as you are outlining, is much broader than that. You have a lot of different things in this witch's brew, and you can't just deal with one of them. So the fact, I liked a lot of the answers I heard, and I thought for the most part, the going across the stage, they all had pretty good answers. I think I liked his the best, but that doesn't mean by any stretch that, like Ron DeSantis talking about using the U.S. military to crush these cartels. I've been saying that for over a year. You start dropping hellfire missiles. They know where these haciendas are, where the drug cartels live, and the heads of the drug cartels. You nail a couple of those to some hellfires from an F-16 or whatever. All of a sudden, you get their attention.
Okay,
and you'll bring it to a stop fast.
Let's go back again now.
Okay.
Years, and you did not deliver on that promise. So Obamacare, right now, it is more popular than ever. Why should Americans trust you, if you become president, to fix that, or is Obamacare here to stay?
Well, first, let me speak to the mass shootings issue, and then I'll answer that question. It's an important one, Dana. Look, I'm someone that believes that justice delayed is justice denied. And as a father of three, as the grandfather of three beautiful little girls, I am sick and tired of these mass shootings happening in the United States of America. And if I'm president of the United States, I'm going to go to the Congress of the United States, and we're going to pass a federal expedited death penalty for anyone involved in a mass shooting, so that they will meet their fate in months, not years. It is unconscionable.
Or decades.
That
sometimes
the Parkland shooter, Ron, is actually going to spend the rest of his life behind bars in Florida. That's not justice. We have to mete out justice and send a message to these would-be killers that you are not going to live out your days behind bars. You're going to meet justice in this system.
But does that mean Obamacare is here to stay?
Okay, that was one for the host.
Okay, but that wasn't fair because he said he was going to answer the question.
Answer it. Look, I think it's one of the choices here. My former running mate, Donald Trump, actually has a plan to start to consolidate more power in Washington, D.C., consolidate more power in the executive branch. If I'm president of the United States, it's my intention to make the federal government smaller by returning to the states those resources and programs that are rightfully theirs under the 10th Amendment of the Constitution. That means all Obamacare funding, all housing funding, all HHS funding, all of it goes back to the states. We'll shut down the Federal Department of Education. We'll allow states to innovate.
That I like.
We're going to revive federalism in America, and states are going to help bring America back.
Stu, go ahead.
May I remind everyone to keep within their time frame so that we can get as many questions in as possible. This question for Governor DeSantis. Over 26 million Americans don't have insurance coverage. Governor DeSantis, 2.5 million of them are in your state. That's worse than the national average. Can Americans trust you on this?
Well, I think this is a symptom of our overall economic decline. Everything has gotten more expensive. You see insurance rates are going through the roof. People that are going to get groceries. I spoke with a woman in Iowa, and she said, for the first time in my life, I'm having to take things out of my grocery cart when I get to the checkout line because the total goes up so quickly. So this is very real, and people are hurting out there. So we've got to address the underlying problem with Bidenomics, the overspending, taking all Biden's rules and regulations. I'm going to throw them in the trash can on day one. You're not going to have to worry about that. We're going to open up all of our energy. We will be energy dominant in this country that will lower your gas prices. And what we need to do with healthcare is recognize our healthcare is putting patients at the back of the bus. We have big pharma, big insurance, and big government, and we need to tackle that and have more power for the people and the doctor-patient relationship.
Governor, why is your record in Florida on insurance worse than the national average?
Our state's a dynamic state. We've got a lot of folks that come. Of course, we've had a population boom. We also don't have a lot of welfare benefits in Florida. You know, we're basically say this is a field of dreams. You can do well in the state, but we're not going to be like California and have massive numbers of people on government programs without work requirements. We believe you work and you got to do that. And so that goes for all the welfare benefits. And you know what that's done, Stuart? Our unemployment rate is the lowest amongst any big state. We have the highest GDP growth amongst any big state. And even CNBC, no fan of mine, ranked Florida the #1 economy in America.
We're moving on.
On the topic of healthcare, Governor Haley, healthcare is the leading cause of bankruptcy for American families, accounting for 2/3 of all personal bankruptcies. As president, how you protect Americans who get sick from financial ruin?
First of all, how can we be the best country in the world and have the most expensive health care in the world? We have an issue. My mom was in the hospital, and when she was in the hospital, they tried to bring her a couple of Tylenol, and she said, I don't need it. And they said, honey, go ahead and take it because you're paying for it anyway. Why is it that when we got the bill, the insurance company and the hospital negotiated the bill for her without her having anything to do with it? When I am president, we will break all of it, from the insurance company to the hospitals to the doctor's offices to the PBMs to the pharmaceutical companies. We will make it all transparent, because when you do that, you will realize that's what the problem is. Second thing is you've got to deal with tort law. The doctors don't give you the 10 tests because they want to. It's because of the 90% chance they'll get sued. And then we need to bring competition back to healthcare, get rid of certificate of need systems, and make sure that they can compete. We have to put the patient in the driver's seat. They've been in the back seat for way too long. And once we give the patient the ability to decide their health care, deciding which plan they want, that is when we will see magic happen. But we're going to have to make every part of the industry open up and show us where their warts are, because they all have them, and we need to fix this on behalf of the American people.
And that's what we did.
Do you have a better way in 30 seconds?
Well, yes, we're not talking about the real problem ever. We talk about why do we have the most expensive health care in the world? It's because the federal government got involved the same way they did with EVs, and they said, we're going to subsidize a particular kind of software back in 2008 under Obama, and they said, hey, we're going to do this. It's going to make everyone more productive. All of you that are watching have been to a doctor's office when the doctor's got his back to you and their hands on a keyboard. The only industry in the world that's ever absorbed $1 trillion of IT and became less productive, they saw less patients per day, is U.S. healthcare, because they were subsidizing a certain kind of technology. It wasn't about improving healthcare. It was about picking winners and losers. Every time the federal government's involved, whether it's higher education, healthcare, or now the auto industry, things get more expensive and less competitive.
That was a great transition, because we are going to move on the future of education in America. What's the government's role in finding a way forward? The second Republican debate rolls on from Simi Valley.
An informed patriotism is what we want. And are we doing a good enough job teaching our children what America is and what she represents in the long history of the world?
I thought there were some very good answers in that clip, in that segment. I really liked what Nikki Haley had to say. I forget exactly what her comment was, but I said that's a good point. It had something to do with putting the making it transparent and allowing patients to. We're talking about healthcare now,
right?
Patients to be involved in the way healthcare is administered.
Well, look. Whether it's healthcare or whatever it is, Nick, there are a couple of real fundamental problems, and you see it again with this debate. You see it here in Canada, and you see it really, frankly, throughout the Western world. This false premise that we've come to accept that you can have a perfect society. And we all pay homage, lip service, if you will, to the idea, particularly if you're conservative, that there's no such thing as utopia. that there's no such thing as a perfect society. And then when we have the opportunity to create government programs to fix the problems that are out there, we're just as addicted to doing that as the next person is and the next political ideology is. The fundamental problem is this, okay? You have to stop looking to the government to solve the problems that you have. Healthcare is a good example. The fact is that you're going to have, just like in wealth, you're going to have people who have more money and you're going to have people who have less money. People who have more possessions and more property, people who have less. In healthcare, it's the same thing.
I was laughing. I was laughing when you said that because I was reminded of a politician who once said, the nine most the one sentence in the English language. He had a number of words.
Nine most fearful words.
Hi, I'm from the government. I'm here to help.
Yeah.
And that person was Ronald Reagan. They're sitting in his library, and the answer is hanging right over their heads.
And it's a difficult answer because it means accepting the fact that we're not going to solve everybody's problem. And so you have to try to find what's the best solution to some of these things. And more often than not, the best solution is to just let people decide. Let the free market decide. And the free market is nothing really more mysterious than free people coming together and working things out. And there's a great, on healthcare, and I'm sorry, I've never heard anybody talk about this in any of these debates, but there's a great system that's in place that's completely private sector, and essentially it's an insurance program, but it's not insurance per se from a legal perspective. But there's a Christian program where individuals pool their money together, and when it comes time that they need to withdraw money from that pooled account, they're able to access the account to pay for their healthcare costs. It's a perfect solution. Okay, it's exactly like insurance without all of the regulatory framework, etc., around it. And there are solutions to this if you would let people find solutions that work for them. And that I wish that we had more talk that way in these debates.
Well, one of the things I'm reminded of is how many times humanity has come up against what seemed like insurmountable obstacles and found a way through ingenuity, creativity, thinking outside the box, call it whatever you want. But they solved the problem. And now we look back on it, it was, take building Niagara Falls, okay, putting in the generator sets there with Tesla and Westinghouse and all that stuff. That was a massive undertaking. Or the Hoover Dam, if you want, or take whatever massive project where there was a problem. Hoover Dam was government built. But the point is, they said, we have a problem, and then backed off and let the private sector fix it. The light bulb is another classic example. Nobody came up with a government program and said, okay, how do we light the world? Edison and Westinghouse, there was a huge competition between the two to come up with a perfect light bulb, along with a whole bunch of other things.
And we are back live at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in the Air Force One Pavilion for the second Republican debate. And let's get back to our questions. Governor Haley, American students, they are in academic trouble. They have lower scores in math and reading. There's chronic absenteeism. That's at record highs. And this has even been called education homicide. You say school choice is the answer, but South Carolina, your home state, still has not enacted universal school choice, and even the current expansion won't be fully implemented until 2027. Parents can't wait 4 years for a fix. So what would you do right now?
Well, and school choice isn't the only answer, but I'll tell you it's not out of a lack of trying that we didn't try and get school choice in South Carolina. What I'll tell you, first of all, is we have to acknowledge the fact that 67% of our 8th graders are not proficient in reading or math. Over 80% of our 8th graders aren't proficient in history or civics. And recently they came out and said our 12 and 13-year-olds are scoring at the lowest levels they've been scoring in reading and math in decades. So the first thing we've got to do is we've got to make sure we catch our kids back up. We have to make sure they can read. A child that can't read by 3rd grade is 4 times less likely to graduate high school. We need to do reading reading remediation. We need complete transparency in the classroom.
See,
no parent should ever wonder
again,
what's being said or taught
this
to
is
their
all
child in the classroom.
the
We
government's
need
got to
make
do
sure
this.
that
We've
we
got to
have
do this.
school
We've got to
choice
do this.
so that there's competition. We need to move all the programs from the federal government down to the states and let states decide what education looks like in their states. And we need to start building things in America again. Let's put vocational classes back in our high schools, and let's get our kids building the things that we know that we can make. When we start to focus on that and really bring in that parental involvement, that's when we'll start to see a difference. But we've got to get parents back included. We've got to quit spending time on this DEI and CRT and instead focus on financial literacy, on digital literacy, and on making sure that our kids know what they need to do to have the jobs of the next generation.
On the subject of education, a question for Governor Christie. Students in your state are getting high marks on their report cards, but minorities are not doing well with math and reading. Black and Hispanic students averaging 29 points lower than white students in New Jersey.
Oh, don't make this about race.
Minorities first.
You have to address all students. And look, in our state, Stuart, frankly, before I was governor, that gap was close to 50%. And what we did was institute more charter schools and more Renaissance schools and more public school choice in New Jersey with innovative solutions in cities like Camden, where now we took what was the worst school district in America during my time, and we have now increased that by nearly 40% in terms of their proficiency. It can be done when you give people choice. But let's tell the truth to everybody about what this is. This public school system is no longer run by the public. It is run by the teachers' unions in this country. Randy Weingarten and her crew are absolutely strangling. They are taking the worst of their members and defending them rather than advocating for our kids. And when you have the President of the United States sleeping with a member of the teachers union, there is no chance that you could take the stranglehold away from the teachers union every day. They have an advocate inside the White House every day for the worst of their teachers, not for our students to be the best they can be. A President of the United States has to take on the teachers union. I did it in New Jersey, and I will do it as President of the United States.
Governor DeSantis, I have a question for you.
Except there shouldn't. Education isn't even a federal mandate or a federal responsibility in the United States, so they should just get out of it altogether. As far as
I think this is Vivek's point. If they get to him,
slaves develop skills in spite of slavery, not because of it. But many are still hurt. For descendants of slaves, this is personal. What is your message to them?
So first of all, that's a hoax that was perpetrated by Kamala Harris. We are not going to be doing that. Second of all, that was written by descendants of slaves. These are great Black history scholars, so we need to stop playing these games. Here's the deal. Our country's education system is in decline because it's focused on indoctrination, denying parents' rights. Florida represents the revival of American education. We're ranked #1 in the nation in education by U.S. News and World Report. My wife and I, we have a 6-, 5-, and 3-year-old. This is personal to us. We didn't just talk about universal school choice. We enacted universal school choice. We didn't just talk about Parents' Bill of Rights. We enacted the Parents' Bill of Rights. We eliminated critical race theory, and we now have American civics and the Constitution in our schools in a really big way, just like President Reagan asked for in his farewell address back in 1989. Florida is showing how it's done. We're standing with parents, and our kids are benefiting.
Senator Scott, you oppose to these new standards. What is your message for Governor DeSantis?
There is not a redeeming quality in slavery. He and Kamala should have just taken the one sentence out. America has suffered because of slavery, but we've overcome that. We are the greatest nation on earth because we faced our demons in the mirror and made a decision. So often we think that all the issues, you talked about crime and education and healthcare, we always think that those issues go back to slavery. Here's the challenge though. Black families survived slavery. We survived poll taxes and literacy tests. We survived discrimination being woven into the laws of our country. What was hard to survive was Johnson's Great Society, where they decided to put money where they decided to take the black father out of the household to get a check in the mail, and you can now measure that in unemployment, in crime, in devastation. If you want to restore hope, you've got to restore the family, restore capitalism, and put
He's bang on here.
back at work together as one American family. Our nation continues to go in the right direction. It's why I can say I have been discriminated against, but America is not a racist country. Never, ever doubt who we are. We are the greatest country on God's green earth. And frankly, the city on the hill needs a brand new leader. And I'm asking for your vote.
I'm going to have a question for you, Mr. Ramaswamy. Over 10.7 million students in over 18,000 public schools nationwide have the ability to change their identity without parental notification.
Oh, dear.
Governor
You knew
Christie
this
told
was
Stewart
coming.
last week that he would pass a federal law to protect parental rights. Would you try to do the same?
I have to be very clear about this. Transgenderism, especially in kids, is a mental health disorder. We have to acknowledge the truth of that for what it is. I met two young women early in this campaign.
Specifically on parental rights in schools.
Parents have the right to know. And you know what the hypocrisy of this is? Even New Hampshire failed to actually get past a piece of legislation here. The very people who say that this increases the risk of suicide are also the ones saying that parents don't have the right to know about that increased risk of suicide. And I'm sorry, it is not compassionate to affirm a kid's confusion. That is not compassion, that is cruelty. I met two young women, Chloe and Katie, early in this campaign, who are in their 20s, now regret getting double mastectomies and a hysterectomy. One of them will never have children. And the fact that we allowed that to happen in this country is barbaric. So I will ban genital mutilation or chemical castration under the age of 18, and parents have absolutely
Would you
the
try
right.
to pass a federal law that says parents should have that right?
We are going to require states absolutely have to follow that through.
Governor
We
Burgum just to
stand
follow
for
up on this
parental rights.
because
Yes.
you in your state you do not have a law that says parents can't be notified, but you want to be president. Would you try to pass a federal law to say parents have that right?
I think this is a state's issue, but I do want to say something, because all night long we've been talking about issues about how it's broken in Washington, and I respect all of the people on the stage here for their 100+ years of public service. Thank you. But the reason why we're not talking about education or health care or safety being a problem in North Dakota is because we have a business leader. I've got more experience as a business leader than I think this whole group combined. I know I've created more jobs than everybody else on stage, thousands of high-paying jobs that have real meaning. So as a business leader, you come in and you treat the taxpayer like a customer. So in North Dakota, instead of fighting with the teachers' unions, we actually created a K-12 coordinating council. Everybody gets in the room and the customer is the student.
But you do understand that this is an issue that many people in America really are concerned about, worried about parents and notification in schools.
Yes.
He's standing on a landmine.
Platforms of innovation. That's why we have states. There are certain things the federal government is supposed to do. It's not the Department of Education. That needs to be assembled. We got to move it back to states. Do what we did in North Dakota. Instead of like, oh, here's a choice school and here's an old school, the old way with the teachers union, the kids are trapped. We made every school in North Dakota an innovation school. Every school got out from under the red tape, and the things that help teach the values that we're trying to get, like 4-H, like FFA, like Boy Scouts, they can get credit for all of that stuff in North Dakota.
He didn't answer the question.
No, which is, again, regrettable because,
in the country right now.
yeah, I agree with you, Nick.
The Department of Homeland Security warns that violence against LGBTQ+ people is on the rise and intensifying. According to a recent study, members of that community are 9 times more likely to be victims of violent hate crimes. As president, how would you protect this community from violent attacks and discrimination?
Enforce the law.
Well, as President of the United States, I'll stand up for the safety and the civil liberties of every American from every background. And I want the American people to know that. But I want to answer the question as well, Dana, that you just asked Doug Burgum. Because by way of full disclosure, Chris, you mentioned the president's situation. My wife isn't a member of the teachers union, but I got to admit, I've been sleeping with a teacher for 38. Look, education is a state and local function. The state of Indiana had one of the very first school choice programs in the country. And when I was governor of the state of Indiana, we doubled it. And as to your question, Dana, let's be very, very clear. When the Linn-Mar Community Schools in Iowa had a policy where you had to have a permission slip from your parents to get a Tylenol, but you could get a gender transition plan without notifying your parents. I weighed in with a foundation. That's not bad policy, that's crazy. We're going to stand up for the rights of parents, and we're going to pass a federal ban on transgender chemical or surgical surgery anywhere in the country. We've got to protect our kids from this radical gender ideology agenda, and we've got to empower parents at the state level with the ability to choose where their kids go to school, whether it's public, private, parochial, or homeschool. You empower parents, and our schools will straighten up and reflect our values and focus on the basics faster than you could possibly imagine.
Next subjects.
Can I just say one thing?
China is investing. If you talk over everybody, we lose time. China is investing heavily in their tech companies. $280 billion every year on semiconductor research and development. That is one CHIPS Act per year. Governor DeSantis, you say companies like Google and Meta have too much power. Doesn't going after them give China an edge?
No, I think you look at how our societies develop, they have huge amount of power over our society. They've cracked down on free speech. We're not saying you don't want them to do business, but you want it to be a free market. And right now they're monopolies. But this issue of China, I think, is really going to be fundamental. We have subcontracted out so much of our national needs to the CCP. We rely on them for a whole host of issues. We need to reshore and we need to decouple all those important industries. We need to get that back in the United States. They are our top geopolitical adversary by a country mile. Xi Jinping's got huge ambitions, not only in the Asia Pacific, but as you mentioned earlier, in our region. But ultimately, we've got to beat him on the economy. And so that's what we'll do as President of the United States.
Governor Christie, I wanted to follow up on this because 22% of American workers fear their jobs will be lost to a robot. And you said in the past that the free market is the way to go. Would you retrain workers who lose a job to artificial intelligence, and to do what?
Well, look, what I think artificial intelligence offers us is an extraordinary opportunity to expand well beyond the productivity that we have now, and to have Americans be able to be involved in that revolution, Dana. You know, each time we have shown incredible innovation and progress in this country. What we've done with it is to expand all kinds of new, even unthought of opportunities for folks. Yes, we have to do retraining for folks who lose some of their jobs, and we should be doing that. And we should have more training available both at the county college level and the local level for people to be able to access it. So yes, I would be in favor of that. But this is a much bigger issue than that. We can't be afraid of innovation. America has been the great innovator of this world over the last 250 years, a technological innovator, a manufacturing innovator, and a freedom and governmental innovator. And that's why America has to continue to stand strong in the world, pro-innovation, pro-progress. And I will tell you this, as President of the United States, what I will do is to make sure that every innovator in this country gets the government the hell off its back and out of its pocket so that it can innovate and bring great new inventions to our country that will make everybody's lives better.
Mr. Ramaswamy, TikTok is banned on government-issued devices because of its ties to the Chinese government. Yet you joined TikTok after dinner with boxer and influencer Jake Paul. Should the commander-in-chief be so easily persuaded by an influencer?
So the answer is I have a radical idea for the Republican Party. We need to win elections. And part of how we win elections is reaching the next generation of young Americans where they are. So when I get into office, I've been very clear. Kids under the age of 16 should not be using addictive social media. We're only going to ever get to declaring independence from China, which I favor, if we actually win. So while the Democrats are running rampant, reaching the next generation 3-1, there's exactly one person in the Republican Party which talks a big game about reaching young people, and that's me. And let me level with all of you. I'm the new guy here, and so I know I have to earn your trust. What do you see? You see a young man who's in a bit of a hurry, maybe a little ambitious, bit of a know-it-all, it seems at times. I'm here to tell you, no, I don't know it all. I will listen. I will have the best people, the best and brightest in this country, whatever age they are, advising me. We will be probably many of the people on this stage included. That's how I built my companies. I want to be challenged. I want people who disagree with me. That's what makes America great, because we're not a perfect nation. We're founded on the pursuit of perfection. That is what makes America great.
So, does that mean that he's going to ban
once we win this election?
the use of social media amongst kids under 16? I'm confused about it.
This is infuriating because TikTok is one of the most dangerous social media apps that we could have. And what you've got, I honestly, every time I hear you, I feel a little bit dumber for what you say, because I can't believe that here you've got a TikTok situation. What they're doing is these 150 million people are on TikTok. That means they can get your contacts, they can get your financial information, they can get your emails, they can get text messages, they can get all of these things.
This is very important for our party.
Exactly what they're doing.
This is very important for our party, and I'm going to say
you've gone and you've helped China make medicines in China, not America. You're now wanting kids to go and get on the social media that's dangerous for all of us. You went and you were in business with the Chinese that gave Hunter Biden $5 million. We can't trust you. We can't trust you. We can't have TikTok in our kids' lives.
This is very important. Mr. Ramaswamy, you have 15 seconds.
I think, excuse me.
You have 15 seconds, Mr. Ramaswamy.
Thank you. I think we would be better served as a Republican Party if we're not sitting here hurling personal insults and actually have a legitimate debate about policy following Reagan's 11th Commandment in his honor. And the answer is that is what actually makes our country strong. And I believe in these people. These are good people on the stage. They disagree, but let's have a legitimate disagreement. That's what I would say.
Stuart, can we get back to the question? The question is on technology.
Governor DeSantis, I'm going straight.
On this stage
Sir, we will have to cut your mic, and I don't want to do that. I don't. So, Governor DeSantis, let me go to you. Experts say President Putin has ordered assassinations across Europe, cheated on arms control treaties with the U.S., and seeks to work with China to force our decline. President Reagan believed that if you want to prevent a war, you better be prepared to fight one. Today, the Republican Party is at odds over aid to Ukraine. The price tag so far is $76 billion. But is it in our best interest to degrade Russia's military for less than 5% of what we pay annually on defense, especially when there are no U.S. soldiers in the fight?
It's in our interest to end this war, and that's what I will do as president. We are not going to have
that's a
a
big
blank
promise
check.
to
We
make.
will not have U.S. troops, and we're going to make the Europeans
He's
do what they need to do. But they've sent money
using
to
not Ron, but Trump's own
pensions
words. He's
and
paraphrasing.
salaries and funding small businesses halfway around the world.
Well, I think it's a
Meanwhile,
big promise
our
for
own country is
Mr.
being
Trump to make as
invaded.
well.
We don't
Yeah.
even have control of our own territory.
They asked him about
We
it,
have
and he
got
said,
to
"I
defend
just."
the
He
American
said, "Are you
people
going? Would you stop
before
this
we
war?" He
even
said, "I
worry about all
want to
these other
stop the
things."
war.
And
I
watch these
just
guys in
want
Washington,
everybody to
D.C.,
stop dying."
And they don't care about the American people. They don't care about the fentanyl deaths. They don't care about the communities being overrun because of this border. They don't care about the Mexican drug cartels. So as Commander-in-Chief, I will defend this country's sovereignty.
But it's not a territorial dispute. It's never been a territorial dispute.
And 90% of the resources that we send over to Ukraine is guaranteed. It's a loan. It is not 90% of the money that we send over there is loan. Well, we can talk about this, but at the end of the day, 90% of the money that we send over there is actually in the form of a loan. It's not actually not be paid by Ukraine. It's paid by the NATO, our NATO allies.
So I think it's a good topic.
I think it's a really good topic too. But I will say let's debate the fact that our national vital interest is in degrading the Russian military. By degrading the Russian military, we actually keep our homeland safer, we keep our troops at home, and we all understand Article 5 of NATO.
We have to level with the American people.
I thought you said something about waiting until your turn to talk. So hold on. So at the end of the day, I'm going to finish my. I'll be happy to debate this.
I'll respond.
I'll look forward to this one right now. So at the end of the day, when you think about the fact that if you want to keep American troops at home, attack on NATO territory would bring us and our troops in. By degrading the Russian military, we reduce, if not
problem is that
eliminate,
Ukraine is not part of NATO.
On NATO territory.
Finish that exchange. We have to level with the American people. We have to level with the American people on this issue. The reality is
We
just
are
because
leveling with
just
the
because
American
Putin is not Putin's an evil dictator does not mean that Ukraine is good. This is a country.
Thank
that has
you.
11 opposition parties.
A win
that has
for
actually,
Russia is a
that
win
is not
for
true.
China.
We're driving
a win
Russia.
for Russia
excuse
is a
me.
win for China.
Excuse me, Nick. You'll have
But
your chance.
I forgot you like
you'll
China.
have,
That's
no,
why
you'll have your chance in just a moment.
Yeah.
The hurling personal insults isn't helping. China is the real enemy, and we're driving Russia further into China's arms. We need a reasonable peace plan to end this, especially this is a country whose president just last week
Vivek,
was
if
hailing
you
a
let
Nazi in
Putin
his own
have
ranks.
Ukraine, that's a green light to China to take Taiwan.
We need a
Peace
reasonable
comes
plan
through
to
strength.
We need a reasonable plan to peace.
Governor Christie.
No, Vivek was right.
Governor Christie. Governor Christie. President Biden's first 2 years have brought China, Russia, and Iran closer together. Are we focused too much on Ukraine and not enough on this threat from the New World Order?
No, they're all connected, Stuart. They're all connected. The Chinese are paying for the Russian war in Ukraine. The Iranians are supplying more sophisticated weapons, and so are the North Koreans now as well, with the encouragement of the Chinese. The naivete on this stage from some of these folks is extraordinary. Look, I understand people want to go and talk to Putin. Guess what? So did George W. Bush. So did Barack Obama. So did Donald Trump. And so did Joe Biden when he said a small invasion wouldn't be so bad. Every one of them has been wrong. And the fact of the matter is, we need to say right now that the Chinese-Russian alliance is something we have to fight against, and we are not going to solve it by going over and cuddling up to Vladimir Putin. Look, Donald Trump said Vladimir Putin was brilliant and a great leader. This is the person who is murdering people in his own country, and now not having enough blood, he's now going to Ukraine to murder innocent civilians and kidnap 20,000 children. And let me tell you, if you think that's where it's going to stop, if we give him any of Ukraine, next will be Poland. Right. This is a guy who said, wait one sec, this is a guy in 1991 who said that was the darkest moment in world history when the Soviet Union fell. Listen, everybody, he wants to put the old band back together, and only America can stop it. Right. And when I'm president, we will.
Governor Burgum, I want to get to Governor Burgum. He hasn't had a chance. I have a question I think you're going to really like. Or at least you have experience in it. And we need to talk about America's farmers, because there is a foreign policy connection here. The U.S. and China are in this fierce economic competition. It's hurting American businesses, and there is blowback against American farmers because China then targets them in retaliation. How would you, as president, protect American farmers and ranchers from that kind of retaliation from a foreign government like China?
Well, first of all, we've got the best farmers and ranchers in the world right here in America. If they have a level playing field, they can outcompete anyone in the world. But this is part of the larger issue that we're talking about here, which is we're in a Cold War with China. The Biden administration won't admit that. But we're also in an economic war through what we're doing with agriculture and energy. And we're also in a war with them relative to cyber war. We get attacked every day in North Dakota, every state, every school district, our tribes, all being attacked every day by either China, Russia, Iran, or North Korea. And now we've got a Biden administration whose whole policy is appeasement. They're out there, creating the world, making it less safe. $6 billion they traded for 5 people. They've just now set a price on anyone's head who's a tourist from America, who's a student from America, for kidnapping. If you want more kidnapping, put a price on it. And then they're also helping Iran get to have more closer to nuclear weapon, which pushes all of the Middle East closer to China and Russia. The whole thing is absurd. And then, of course, we're going to give Ukraine to Russia, and then we're going to give Taiwan to China, and think that's a foreign policy. That will make our nation less successful, make us more poor. And at the core of all that is energy policy, because China imports 10 million barrels of oil a day. They're the largest import in the world, and we've had 4 cabinet members from the Biden administration there this summer, and none of them talked about U.S. energy. The first one to go to each of those countries was Kerry, to talk about the folly of the climate policy, which is making the world less stable. It's empowering dictators. It's not about climate change that we need worried about. It's about the Biden climate policies that are actually the existential threat to America's future.
Thank you.
Can I speak about
Governor Haley, Mexico's president called who supports sending U.S. military into the country, quote, scoundrels. Mexico is the United States' most important trade partner and border security. You say you will send special operations to attack the cartels in Mexico. So, this means boots on the ground, Drone strikes?
It means special operations. It's how we deal with our terrorists. And what you need to do is understand that Mexico's not being a good partner if we lost 75,000 Americans last year. Mexico's not being a good partner if they're letting the cartels get away with what they're getting away with. What we will do is we will make sure that we send in our special operations and we will take out the cartels, we'll take out their operations, we'll take out anything that's doing it. But we're going to go after China because China is the one sending the fentanyl in the first place. And we will end
That was
all
kind of like
normal
a
trade
cha-ching
relations
moment.
until China stops sending fentanyl. And then we'll do the
That's
special
called,
operations
here's
and
how
we'll
he
get it from
switched to
both
what I
sides.
want to talk
This
about.
is where President Trump went wrong. He focused on trade with China. He didn't focus on the fact that they were buying up our farmland. He didn't focus on the fact that they were killing Americans. He didn't focus on the fact that they were stealing $600 billion in intellectual property. He didn't focus on the fact that they put a spy base off our shores in Cuba. They didn't focus enough on the fact that all of our law enforcement drones in America are Chinese, and we've got all these little surveillance cells. We need to start focusing on what keeps Americans safe. That hasn't happened in a long time. As your president, I will make sure every American is safe, and we'll do whatever it takes to make that happen.
All right. I want to get to Senator Scott. You're all auditioning for the job as President of the United States. You want to earn these votes. But the world's problems land in the Oval Office. During the presidential debates in the year 2000, neither Al Gore nor George W. Bush was asked about al-Qaeda. Yet, just 1 year later, al-Qaeda's attack on September 11th claimed nearly 3,000 lives. And the farther we get from September 11th, the closer we are to September 10th. Senator Scott, you have no executive branch experience. What has prepared you to protect the nation from a major man-made national security crisis?
Well, one of the things I've had the good fortune of doing is serving on committees in the United States Senate, like the Senate Armed Services Committee. I'm on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, also on the Finance Committee and the Banking Committee. Talk about addressing the issue of fentanyl. I've written the legislation, passed it through the Banking Committee and the Senate that would freeze the assets and sanction the accounts of the Mexican cartels. There are weapons that we have within the arsenal that I was able to get past 23-0 in the polarizing Senate as it is. I've also understood without question the fact that if you look at the details before 9/11, there was information and intelligence that was available that suggested an attack was coming. Having the right intelligence partners with us is key to making sure that we prevent the next 9/11 from ever happening. Having that experience for the last 10 years is really important in getting the job done.
30 seconds to you, Mr. Pence.
Well, I think you asked a question about executive experience. I think it's vitally important. And I stand before you today as a candidate for president because I think this country's in a lot of trouble. And you hear the fire on the stage tonight. You hear the fire in all of our voices. And it's because Joe Biden has weakened this country at home and abroad. This is a time for those of us that have the experience, the tested experience, and a commitment to the conservative agenda that Ronald Reagan brought forward in this party of a strong national defense, standing with our allies, standing up to our enemies, supporting limited government and traditional values, need to step forward.
Understood.
Because, frankly, our party does face a time for choosing, as they said at the top of this debate, whether we're going to stand on the foundation of that conservative agenda that Ronald Reagan poured, or whether we're going to follow the siren song of populism unmoored to conservative principles. I'm the most experienced, most qualified, and most consistent conservative in this field, and I'm ready to lead America at home and abroad on day one.
Time for choosing to go to a break. Ilya.
We need to go to a commercial break. Reagan built a coalition that lasted decades. Can any of these candidates do the same? We'll take that up when the debate continues.
All right. Well, what do you think so far, Nick?
Well, on one hand, any single one of them would be miles better than the current occupant of the White House. That I think goes without saying.
I don't. I think that anybody who thinks that Joe Biden should be the president of the United States after the 2024 election, they are smoking something.
Smoking the grapes.
And that is, I'm not even talking here about policy or any of that. I'm just the man is beyond having the capacity to discharge the duties of the President of the United States, as far as I'm concerned.
His decline has been going on for a couple of years now, where he's not the Joe Biden that almost ran from his basement during the last election.
It is.
So anyway, the point I was making is any one of them is a fitting replacement to to go against the Democrats and beat the current whoever this administration chooses to replace Joe Biden with, because clearly that's going to be the case. And we weren't going to get in a democratic situation. That'll be interesting during the next debate when they have their first round of debates. But let's face it, they don't have anybody on the bench. You don't want Giggle and Harris. You know, who they got. So looking at this field here, in general, I think they're doing a good job of, and there's been a lot of talking over. That's natural because everybody's looking for that soundbite, and they don't want to be misrepresented, or they would put it, misrepresented. They don't want a label to stick, so they're trying to slay those dragons before they ever get started. I get that, but overall, I think they've done a good job of pointing out. And each one has had some very interesting points. It's not like one guy's leading the pack and everybody else is running to catch up. They've all got their points. Christie's made some great points. Vivek's made some great points. The governor of North Dakota has made some great points. On and on and on. And they all have, in one way or the other, with maybe the exception of Vivek, ducked answering direct questions. But that's been the exception, not the rule. So overall, I'm pretty pleased with it.
Okay, I can accept that. I'm just watching the feed to see when they're coming back from their commercial break. But we're still into commercials. Look, I miss the conversational style, the folksiness, the just chatting about issues that we had with Ronald Reagan. And I don't think I'm being too nostalgic. I'm just saying that, to me, these guys, with very few exceptions, are just over scripted. And I've just learned to mistrust the over scripting, the over preparation.
Let's be honest about this. Ronald Reagan was called the great communicator. Why? Because he was excellent at that. Remember the Mondale debate where he said, listen, I didn't want to bring it up, but I will not use my opponent's lack of experience against him.
Yeah.
Because they were going to say he was too old. So he, thinking ahead, he was able to, Mr. Mondale. And there are those who say that's what won in the election.
Okay, let's go back. Let's go back to the debates just coming back on now.
Sure. And a lot more questions to go. So let's dive right back in. We're here in California, where gas is nearing $6 a gallon. Oil is close to $100 a barrel again. You say, drill, baby, drill. But the courts won't let you. Mr. Ramaswamy, how would you bring down prices without immediate drilling?
Well, look, I think that we do have to run through the courts and get through that administrative state to make sure we're using the natural resources here at home. But here's the other thing that we can do that's easy.
It would take forever, Mr. Ramaswamy.
And it addresses the national debt as well as brings down prices. Put people back to work. We are using taxpayer money to pay people more to stay at home than to go to work. That is wrong. That contributes to our supply chain crisis. It contributes to inflation. That's the easiest way to unlock this economy. And here's the other thing. We have to put the Federal Reserve back in its place. This is an agency that has gone rogue. So in January 2026, when I have the opportunity as their next commander-in-chief, we will have a new chairman of the Federal Reserve who places priority on dollar stability and then, most importantly, send packing 75% of the administrative state, reduce the federal employee headcount by 75%,
Wow,
rescind
that's
50%
awful.
of unconstitutional federal regulations
Would
that are
anybody miss
shackling
him?
businesses, both large and small. I've offered a very clear, practical plan to do it. That's how we unleash the economy. That's how we revive the integrity of a three-branch constitutional republic rather than this technocracy and aristocracy in the administrative
your
state.
response, please.
I think one of the signature accomplishments of our administration was in just a few short years, we achieved energy independence. We became a net exporter of energy for the first time in 75 years. But on day one, Joe Biden declared a war on energy, which was no surprise because when Joe Biden ran for president, he said he was going to end fossil fuels. And they've been working overtime to do that ever since. If I'm president of the United States, we're going to open up federal lands. We're going to unleash American energy. We're going to have an all-of-the-above energy strategy. And I have a plan that actually would not only reclaim energy independence, but in 2006, America lost our position as the leading energy producer on Earth. I believe in the next 10 years, with the right policies and experienced leadership in the White House, we can reclaim our role as the leading energy producer on Earth, and that'll grow the American economy for generations to come.
Governor Haley, reaction to that, please.
As the only person who's leading an energy state, could I answer the energy question?
No, Governor Haley.
So, the first thing I'll say is what I saw at the United Nations is energy security is national security. We need a president that understands we have to partner with our producers and make sure that we have their backs. What you don't need is a president who is against energy independence. Ron DeSantis is against fracking. He's against drilling. He's been against, you did it. He always talks about what happens on day one. You better watch out, because what happens on day two is when you're in trouble. Day two in Florida, you banned fracking, you banned offshore drilling, you did it on federal lands, and you took green subsidies that you didn't have to take.
Governor DeSantis, you were mentioned. You have the right to respond. 30 seconds.
Yeah. I just did a plan out in West Texas for American energy dominance. We're going to choose Midland over Moscow. We're going to choose the Marcellus over the Mullahs, and we're going to choose Bakken over Beijing, and we are going to lower your gas prices. We are going to get that job done because it's important for our national security, it's important for jobs, and that's one of the best ways to drive down inflation.
Governor DeSantis, Governor DeSantis,
Governor DeSantis,
this question is for you.
Our voters enacted a constitutional amendment that doesn't allow. No, it's not true.
You banned it before they voted, and not only that, fracking wasn't. They didn't vote on fracking.
She's totally wrong. They voted it in. That's what we did. Onshore, we do it in Florida. We don't have as much as maybe West Texas, but we do it. But that was a constitutional. So that's just wrong. And let's just get real here. My plan will get the job done. We are going to be energy dominant, and that's what's going to happen.
Oh, man, you know what? I'm really developing a dislike for her.
This question for Governor DeSantis. Governor, excuse me, we cannot talk over each other. We must respect each other's time. My apologies for that.
I'm ready, Stuart.
Governor DeSantis, this is your question. The Biden administration is hell-bent on student loan forgiveness, but you say colleges should be on the hook when graduates cannot pay their debt. How does that address the cost of college? The cost of college itself?
Because the colleges are going to have to make a decision. Do we expand the gender studies department, knowing some of those graduates may not have great learning opportunities? No, they're going to focus on the things that really matter. They're going to make different choices. They're going to try to graduate people in 4 years. I also just want to come back to something Dana asked last segment about 9/11, because I was just at the 9/11 memorial with the families. My wife and I were invited. It's very touching to be there, and it affected my life because I ended up joining the military as a result of that. I've been a blue-collar kid, minimum wage in Dunedin, Florida. I ended up getting through Yale and Harvard Law School and somehow came out more conservative than when I went in, and that is not easy to do. Had a lot of opportunities to make money, but I wanted to serve, and I'll never forget coming back on the plane from Iraq, landing in Coronado, California, North Island, and feeling that breeze off the Pacific Ocean and say, you know what? I am lucky to have been born an American, and I think being able to serve, and I'll be the first president elected since 1988 who's actually served overseas in a war, I think that's going to help me as commander-in-chief to know how you see these issues and understand that there are real lives at stake for people that wear the uniform.
And we know that Governor Haley's husband is serving right now as well, and we thank him for that. Senator Scott, the national debt has nearly doubled in your time in office. The approval rate for Congress is at a mere 19%. If this were a business, you'd probably all be fired in Washington, but you're here tonight looking for a promotion. In 2013, Governor Haley hired you for the Senate. I'd like you to tell her why you should be promoted to CEO of the nation instead of her.
Certainly. One of the things I'd say is if you look at our national debt of $33 trillion, I would love to have an opportunity to have this country pass a balanced budget amendment. That would constrain the spending in Washington in the same fashion that it does in every state in our nation, number one. Number two, if you want to actually reduce our national debt, you have to grow our economy. In order to grow our economy, you need to create about 10 million jobs to grow our economy at 5%.
Here we go again.
In three specific sectors.
Somehow or other, the government's going to grow the
Could
economy.
create between 3 and 3.5
It's crazy.
million jobs if we unleashed all of our energy resources. America is we're the richest country if you combine coal, gas, and oil. Why not unleash all of our resources? Number two, we've lost 100,000
The only thing the government can do is get out of the way.
100,000 factories
Remove
in 25
the
years.
restrictions
If we
on
continued our
energy
Made in America
extraction.
plan, we could bring jobs back to America.
And then what
similar
he's
fashion
talking
that we
about would
did
make sense.
when I
It doesn't
wrote
have to be the
Tax Cuts
government to
and
do
Jobs
it.
Act.
It has to be the government to allow it
actually
to
lowered
happen.
the corporate tax from 35% to 21%, reshored or repatriated $1.7 trillion. We brought the unemployment rates for African Americans, Hispanics, and Asians to the lowest level in the history of the country, and a 70-year low for women.
Governor Haley, would you think you would deserve the
first of
promotion
all,
over
I think,
him?
look, I appreciate Tim. We've known each other a long time, but he's been there 12 years and he hasn't done any of that. He hasn't. They've only given 4 budgets on time in 40 years. He was part of that. He increased the national debt. He voted for the spending.
You voted
he has
for
made sure that the borders are open and
asked
they
for a
haven't done
gas
anything.
tax
Look at
increase
everything
in
that's
South
happened.
Carolina.
12 years. Where have you been? Where
I
have
voted
you
no
been,
on all.
Tim?
I voted on most of those things.
We've
I have
waited
voted
and
most.
nothing has happened.
Here's what you've
12
done.
years.
Here's the thing that I
12
just find interesting.
Ron, let me finish
All
it
these
first.
guys have said
Here's the
things,
fact.
and I appreciate a lot of the things they're saying.
Nikki
I'm
Haley.
the only one up here who's gotten in the big fights and has delivered big victories for the people of Florida, and that's what it's all about. You can always talk, but when it gets hot in there, when they're shooting arrows at you, are you going to be stand up for parents' rights, to keep the state free? Are you going to be able to do all those things? And in the state of Florida, because of our success, the Democratic Party lies in ruins. We have won the big fights. We have turned our state into a Republican state. People respond to leadership. I've done it while others have talked about it.
CEO, we actually have a CEO in the White House, which is what I think we need.
Here we go again.
Yeah, everybody wants to make sure nobody scores any points they can't counter.
That's the way businesses are actually run. Start with 0 as the baseline for the budget, and then see what's actually necessary. There isn't a blue state or a red state in this union that does it. The federal government doesn't do it. But successful companies, including the ones that I've built as a CEO, will do it. And I think we need a CEO in the White House to get that done.
Governor Burgum runs a state that way. Yes, go ahead.
You didn't ask the only guy that's been in tech. You have energy questions. You don't ask anything. But I'm just going to say right now, when you say nobody else has done it, the energy plans that have all been announced in the last month by these other folks on stage, we're already doing it in North Dakota. The border plans they're already talking about, we've got troops down at the border flying helicopter missions from North Dakota, from San Diego to the Gulf Coast, trying to stop transnational criminal organizations from inflicting the invasion and the mass casualties in our state. And on the energy policy, we're already doing it. And it's not saying when nobody else done the big fights, North Dakota was leading the charge. We won the battle to get the Biden administration, who was ignoring the law. They were the first administration since Truman that wasn't holding the quarterly required lease sales, and we won that in federal court. WOTUS, we won that in federal court. We're fighting the Biden administration on 20 fronts. To say that nobody's fighting the big fights, just look at the record of what we're doing right now. Energy, economy, national security, I've been talking about it since day one, and now finally good, we're having the conversation about it, but we've got the answer in North Dakota.
Governor Burgum, let's talk big government. This question's for you. Big government keeps getting bigger. 1/5 of all new jobs this year have been created by the government. Governor Burgum, you say you want to shrink the size of government, but it has been a century since any president has done that. Why would you be any different?
Well, because we've done it in North Dakota. When I took office, we shrunk the state budget general fund by 27% in the first 4 months I was office, and all the trains still running on time. Why? Because you had a business leader that was actually there. Inside of every government job, there's 10 or 20% of mind-numbing, soul-sucking work that even the state and federal employees don't want to do, and you can engineer that work out of the job. That would free up right there 20% of 2 million civilian employees. And by the way, we've got 10 million jobs open. They'd have plenty to do, and they could be generating taxes instead of being paid by taxes. This is totally possible to do it if you have somebody that understands, because having worked in technology for 30 years,
scoring some points now.
Was to be better, faster, and cheaper the next day. That's what we can do in government. That's what we're doing in North Dakota.
All right. Governor DeSantis, I want to ask you about something that I think is on a lot of Republicans' minds. This election could come down to less than 50,000 votes in 3 states. Abortion was on the ballot in 6 states in 2022. Republicans lost all of them. Next year, abortion will likely be on the ballot in Arizona. That is a must-win state. Governor DeSantis, how are you going to win over independent, pro-choice voters in Arizona?
Same way we did in Florida. We won the greatest Republican victory in a governor's race in the history of the state, over 1.5 million votes. We were winning places like Miami-Dade County, Palm Beach, that nobody thought was possible because we were leading with purpose and conviction. I reject this idea that pro-lifers are to blame for midterm defeats. I think there's other reasons for that. The former president, he's missing in action tonight. He's had a lot to say about that. He should be here explaining his comments to try to say that pro-life protections are somehow a terrible thing. I want him to look into the eyes and tell people who've been fighting this fight for a long time. My wife and I earlier today were at the gravesite of President and Mrs. Reagan, and I noticed that there was a quote where it says, "Every single person has purpose and worth." We're better off when everybody counts. And I think we should stand for what we believe in. I think we should hold the Democrats accountable for their extremism, supporting abortion all the way up until the moment of birth. That is infanticide, and that is wrong.
Let me ask Governor Christie. Governor Christie, do you think that Republicans...
Yes, I will.
Okay, Governor Christie, do you think that Republicans can do that in Arizona if this referendum is on the ballot there?
Yeah, because I did it in New Jersey, Dana.
Then why are all these other states losing?
Well, because they don't have leaders in those states who are leading the fight the way it should be led. And in fact is, look, I was a governor here of the only blue state that's represented up here. This is where the fight is really tough for Republicans. And those are the states that we're going to have to try to win if we're going to win the White House back. And what we did was 14 times, Dana, in 8 years, I vetoed Planned Parenthood funding. 14 times. No one else gets it that much. The Democrats just kept sending it to me, and I kept saying no because I believe in life, but I also believe in states' rights. And I think we fought hard against Roe versus Wade for decades to say that states should make these decisions. So we're going to have those fights in the states. But what you need is a leader who can talk to people and make them understand that if you're pro-life, you have to be pro-life for the entire life, not just the 9 months in the womb. And we talked a lot about fentanyl tonight, and we haven't spoken one moment about treatment. But we need to make sure that for the drug-addicted 16-year-old on the floor of the county lockup, her life is precious too. And we need to be providing treatment to cure this as a disease that it is. If you're pro-life, you got to be pro-life for the entire life. We start talking like that, they're going to do what I did in the blue state, which was get reelected with 61% of the vote and won 70% of independents and 51% of Latinos because I told them the truth from my heart.
Thank you.
Vice President Pence. The latest Univision poll found that 73% of Latino voters think the Republican Party doesn't care about or is being hostile toward them, the Hispanic community. Only Governor DeSantis has translated his campaign into Spanish. How will you reach out to Latino voters?
Well, I promise you that we're going to continue to build bridges to every community in this country. And I'm incredibly proud of that tax cut and tax reform bill. I worked on Capitol Hill to help get that bill passed into law, the largest tax cut in American history. We saw literally the lowest unemployment ever recorded for Hispanic Americans, the lowest unemployment ever recorded for African Americans, 50-year low for women. So I think the President of the United States needs to be a champion for the American dream for every American. It begins with the unborn and the aged and the infirm. And it begins with every ethnic group in this country. And I promise you, if I'm president of the United States, I'll be a champion. I'll be a champion for the American dream, for Hispanic Americans, and for every American. So help me God.
Senator Scott, reaction?
Yes, there's no doubt that if you lead by example, it's the best way to get the job done. If you look at my office in the Senate, my chief of staff is the only Hispanic female chief of staff in the Senate. I hired her because she was the best, highest qualified person we have. What we need are leaders who lead by example. And I will simply say, I would love to finish my conversation with Nikki as it relates to the job that needs to get done. Nikki offered a 10%, 10-cent gas tax increase in South Carolina. Talk about someone who has never seen a federal dollar she doesn't like. 10 cents on this gallon in South Carolina. As the UN ambassador, you literally put $50,000 on curtains in a $15 million subsidized location. Next.
You got bad information. First of all, I fought the gas tax in South Carolina multiple times against the establishment.
Just go to YouTube.
Against the establishment.
Just go to
and
YouTube
you want to know what that 10 cent was? When they wouldn't pass the gas tax, the establishment and the companies wanted me to do it so much that I said the only way I will pass it if you will give us three.
All you have to do is go watch Nikki Haley on YouTube.
If you will give me 3 times the deduction in income tax, then I will look at your gas tax, which is why it didn't happen.
Exactly, Ron.
Secondly, on the $50 million.
Here is a nice part.
Secondly, on the curtains, do your homework, Tim, because Obama bought those curtains.
Did you send them back?
It's in the press.
Did you send them back?
It's the State Department.
Did you send them back?
Did you send them back? You're the one that works in Congress.
Oh my gosh.
You get it
You
done.
hung them on your curtains.
They were there before I even showed up at the residence. You are scrapping. You are scrapping.
I'm not scrapping.
You know I fought
Here's the fact. Here's the fact, though.
I cut taxes. I loaded up our
You wanted a gas tax increase, and then you wanted
It's entertaining at least.
In fact, we're about to take a commercial break. We'll have more of the second Republican debate live from the Reagan Presidential Library in just a few moments.
You got to admit that was entertaining. But I did like the fact that the vast majority of them are staunchly pro-life. That to me says a lot.
Yeah, it is, and again, you know, I like Chris Christie's response to it.
I did too. I really like that one.
It's a first of all, you have to be pro-life for the entire life, and we have to talk about how we address, for instance, drug addiction rather than giving them the needle. We have to find ways to help them to get off of their addiction. I think that's extremely important. But it's a matter of state rights as well, and every state is going to have to come up with its own because that's the way the Constitution works in the United States. But I want to say, Nick, I'm still very troubled by just the theme that winds its way throughout these debates is always when you're in government, what are you going to do to solve this problem? When you're in government, what are you going to do to solve this problem? I always come back to this answer that Randy Hillier here when he was running for the leadership of the Ontario Progressive Conservative Party at a debate in Ottawa. You'll recall the moment when somebody asked, when the moderator asked all of the candidates, you know, tell me your vision for Ontario, for the people of Ontario. And everybody had this long, convoluted answer, you know, grandiose things. And when it came up to Randy, his answer was very simple. He just sort of looked at everybody and said, well, I'll tell you, I always get very nervous when people ask that question, that my vision for Ontario is that each of you get to follow your own vision. And I don't have a vision for you. You all have your own vision. I'm paraphrasing, of course.
Yeah.
We need conservative leaders, whether they're in the United States or they're here in Canada or anywhere else, who are prepared to start talking about people standing up on their own 2 feet. And not just because you have to learn to stand up to your own 2 feet, but because they can, if they're given the opportunity, if people get the government gets off their backs and out of their pockets, they will be successful. This is the conservative message, and it's the positive message, I think. And that is that we trust people. We know people can be successful. They don't need the government. The government, as you pointed out earlier, Nick, is the problem in most cases. So stop talking about what are you going to do about education? Well, I live for the day that somebody gets asked that question and they say, nothing. I'm not going to do anything for education. Thank you very much.
That's right. Next question.
Next question.
But, yeah, of course.
We get a standing ovation for that, by the way,
You know what? There would be a lot of people, especially given Ontario's situation. Well, all across the country, let's be honest. We have revolts going on, Million Man marches and so on about education and leave the kids alone and all that stuff. Parents have always been the primary educators of their children. And the fact that some bureaucrat somewhere, or sociocrat, as I like to call them, thinks that they don't have to tell parents what's going on. That's why I was interested in what they had to say about parental rights.
Members of the alleged caring professions, as John Mortimer once wrote.
Yes, exactly. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, because I've always said that Canada follows the United States socially by about 10 years. So it'll be very interesting to see how the American election, is part of the reason why we're covering this, is how this election is going to have an impact on the upcoming federal election here in Canada. Because of I think there's credible history to make that point. It's going to be a very interesting election. And so far, everybody's had some interesting points, although that last little bit with Nikki Haley and okay, come on.
A little childish, I think, but
yeah, well, it goes back to what's her name with the orange juice, right? What was her name?
Well, we have to come back there. They're back, Nick.
Okay, go ahead.
It's now obvious that if you all stay in the race, former President Donald Trump wins the nomination. None of you have indicated that you're dropping out. So, which one of you on stage tonight should be voted off the island? Please use your marker to write your choice on the notepad in front of you. 15 seconds starting now. Of the people on the stage, who should be? I'm absolutely serious.
With all due respect, I mean, we're here, we're happy to debate, but I think that's disrespectful to my fellow competitors.
Nobody wants to participate.
Let's do some questions. Let's talk about the future of the country.
That was a good point by DeSantis.
Yeah, no, that was a good response.
Let me ask you something. Then if you won't answer to that question, let me ask you this one. Yeah. What is your mathematical path, Governor DeSantis, in order to try to beat President Trump, who has a commanding and enduring lead in this race?
So polls don't elect presidents. Voters elect presidents. Right. And we're going to take the case to the people in these early states. We're going to do it in a state-by-state direction. And why? Because as Reagan said in his day, this is our time for choosing. We are not getting a mulligan on the 2024 election. Republicans have lost 3 straight elections in a row. We were supposed to have a red wave with inflation at 9%. It crashed and burned. Not in Florida, it didn't. We delivered it in Florida. And so we've got to choose right. We've got to win. And we need somebody that's going to be able to serve 2 terms. So in January of 2023, they'll be able to address the nation saying, we turned the economy around, we secured the border, and we fended off the threat from communist China. As your president, I will get that job done.
Governor Christie, I believe I did see you write something. Governor Christie, I believe, excuse me, Governor Christie, I believe I did see you write something on the card. Who was it?
No, but I'll certainly tell you.
Go.
Okay.
Yeah. Look, I think I've been the only one on this stage who's been clear about this. I vote Donald Trump off the island right now. And the reason I vote him off the island,
any of the people on the stage,
you know what? Every person on this stage has shown the respect for Republican voters to come here to express their views honestly, candidly, and directly, and to take your questions honestly. I have respect for every man and woman on this stage because they've done it. Vivek, put your hand down for a second, would you? I still got time, dude. So chill out. Here, look. This guy has not only divided our party, he's divided families. all over this country. He's divided friends all over this country. I've spoken to people, and I know everyone else has, who have sat at Thanksgiving dinner or at a birthday party and can't have a conversation anymore if
Governor,
they disagree with Donald Trump.
Governor
He needs to
and
be voted
candidates.
off the island, and he needs to be taken out of this process.
Can we get debate 15 seconds?
All right, you've got 15 seconds
I
debate.
appreciate your sense of humor. Look, I have a different view on this. I think Trump was an excellent president, but the America First agenda does not belong to one man. It does not belong to Donald Trump. It doesn't belong to me. It belongs to you, the people of this country. And the question is, who's going to unite this country and take the America First agenda to the next level? When we rallied behind the cry to make America great again, we did not just hunger for a single man. We hungered for the unapologetic pursuit of excellence. So yes, I will respect Donald Trump and his legacy because it's the right thing to do. But we will unite this country to take the America First agenda to the next level, and that will take a different generation to do it.
That does it. I repeat, that does it for the second Republican primary debate live from the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library.
Thank you to all the candidates. We've loved having you here tonight, and we will see you out on the campaign trail.
Have a great evening. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Good night. Buenas noches.
All right. Impressions overall.
Well, I don't know, Nick. It just, I think I feel challenged. I don't. First of all, I think everybody scored some points. If you want to make it into that kind of a competition,
right?
Who do I think did the least well? I regret to say that I think that Mike Pence didn't do very well. I don't. He doesn't come across. Again, I have a lot of time and a lot of respect for Mike Pence, but he doesn't seem to have the fire in his belly, and to me
Did
that's
he
an important
seem
thing.
canned to you?
Oh yeah, a little bit, but that's in fairness to Pence, that's kind of his style
Okay.
of speaking. But I don't think I just it doesn't do it for me.
What struck me about Pence was he appeared to be yesterday's man. Like, okay, I don't doubt his experience and his point about being able to hit the ground running, but politics is a job that comes with no job description. You know, there
Really,
other than
you're
the
right.
most vague terms. So
Right.
that didn't resonate with me. So as far as Pence was concerned, he did okay. I don't know if he hurt himself, but I doubt he's going to get a big bump out of this.
Right. The other candidate that failed to impress me tonight was Nikki Haley.
Yeah.
I don't. She came across as a bit of a screecher, a bit of a whiner.
I thought the same thing.
Her answers were canned answers, so to speak. They were rehearsed and didn't really get into any kind of substance. Now, having said that, in fairness, nobody else really did either. They all did well in their time, but where every candidate impressed me tonight, other than I felt Pence and Haley, where every candidate impressed me tonight was when they stopped with the pre-packaged answers.
Right.
And they spoke from their head and from their heart, extemporaneously, and I didn't like it when everybody started getting talking over one another. I find that to be very disrespectful and undignified and not presidential. But when they were answering some questions that required them to speak from the heart, all of them impressed.
Yeah, they did, and the bickering back and forth. That's the nature of the beast. You see it. You watch any political debate amongst candidates in any jurisdiction, and you're going to see that. You went through that when you ran for municipal election in Ottawa.
Yeah,
you know,
the format is. There are three problems. The first is format is a problem.
Yeah.
The second is the number of candidates, which feeds into the format problem, which is in fact why the format is the way it is.
Right.
But the other but the real problem is the individuals that they know the rules. Often with these presidential debates, the rules are negotiated beforehand and they all agree to them, and then they don't follow them.
Would
And,
you prefer? Let me just throw this at you. Would you? Because this just came to mind. Maybe it doesn't work at all, or it wouldn't work at all. But rather than have them on stage live and debating each other back and forth, and there's something to be said for the rough and tumble of a face-on-face debate, but have them sit down with an interviewer with a list of questions and have them record their answers and then play them one after the other and let people decide based on their answers without being interrupted and without being shouted over um, who the best candidate is.
I think that actually, you know, I think that would be a very good idea. Rather than having this everybody on the stage at once,
Yeah.
uh, have have um, have something where yeah, I mean you'd have to think it through how to organize it, but I like the idea of just having a one-on-one conversation with an interviewer where they're putting those questions to you, and take your 2 minutes to answer the question.
Yeah.
Or if it takes 2.5 minutes, then that's fine. A good interviewer, as you know, because you did it for years on terrestrial radio, Nick, a good interviewer knows how to let the interviewee answer the questions without going on too long.
Well, look, comes down to basic human decency. If you ask somebody a question, okay, then your role as an interviewer is to shut the hell up and let them answer.
Right.
I can think of dozens of interviews I've done where, and if it goes a couple seconds too long, they know how long it is. And you say, if it gets too long, say, okay, listen, we need to wrap this up. I got to move on
Or
to
move
another
on,
question.
next question. But a
Yeah.
good interviewer knows how to control the
The
interview,
pace
not
of the
the
interview.
answers, but the
Absolutely.
interview.
Right. And the one thing I would not do is give them a list. I don't know if they got a list of what the questions would be. It doesn't strike me that happened, but I wouldn't do it. Simply have a list of questions that I would ask each. I used to do this with municipal politics when I'd open the studio door to people who would come in, and I'd say, okay, explain to the people listening why they should vote for you, and sit back and listen and let them talk. And, I give them each a half an hour. Well, that's plenty of time for somebody running for municipal office or any level of office to explain his strengths, deal with his weaknesses. We all have them. And anybody who says, "Oh, I'm the perfect candidate, I don't have any weaknesses," automatically disqualifies himself in my mind, because we all have weaknesses. We all have things we could do better. So go through this, and then when they're done, you could even do this live. Have two chairs facing each other. Candidate A walks out, sits down in front of the audience, and answers the questions. And when he's done, he walks off, and the next one comes out.
Right. Well,
I
the fly
really
in the
think that's
ointment on that kind of a format is that the fly in the ointment in that kind of of a of a format. The problem would be that you're giving other people the opportunity. You'd want to have the other candidates isolated so that they're not hearing the
that's what green
answers.
rooms are for.
Yeah, but look, getting back to the debate itself,
Yeah.
I don't like the format, but I understand the complexity of trying to find a format that's going to work well with so many candidates. So let's set aside the format for a second. The other thing I think, and more importantly, that struck me about this debate was that a lot of the questions were the same questions that had been asked at the last debate. I was thinking this
I didn't notice that.
as the debate was going on. Well, you have to have watched the last debate.
Does help, yes.
Questions about energy efficiency or energy independence.
Right.
Well, there was a whole discussion about energy independence at the first debate. Why are we covering it at the second debate? Education, foreign policy. How many times do we have to listen to what we're going to do about China? I think a better way of doing this would be if you're going to have 4 debates, then have each debate focusing on one policy area. And that way you probably get a better, fuller range of ideas and policy options and discussions focused on something. Like, for instance, if you're going to do a debate, do a 2-hour debate or an hour and a half debate on China, okay, or on foreign policy, and then you could talk about the situation in Eastern Europe. You could talk about the Far East. You could talk about South America and Central America in more detail, more expansively than tonight, where you're trying to fit it all in, and nobody really gives a full answer, and everybody's fighting to get their soundbite in on a particular issue. So I'm surprised that they haven't done that. I think that's a very big failing on the part of the organizers of these debates. And I don't understand why they've chosen to do it this way. But who knows what the third debate is going to look like? But there's nothing that indicates to me, now that we're well into the debate season, there's nothing to me that indicates that they would be able to change course on this. So a third debate would be really more of the same. And there were no answers in this debate. There were no answers that I hadn't heard in the first debate on any of the issues that were repeated. So I think that's a real problem in the overall formatting of these debates collectively.
Yeah. Well, the question now becomes, what do you talk about now, right? It's like going out on a date. You get to know each other a little bit, then you go out on the second date. Now you start to discuss some issues. What do you do on a third date, right?
I guess so. But especially if
you run out of things to talk about if you blow through them too quickly.
Well, and you end up repeating yourself. I mean, how many times do I have to hear that? How many times do we have to hear that we have to stop the Russians in Ukraine, otherwise they might attack Poland? I'm skeptical about that assessment, but okay, people are entitled to their positions and their opinions, so that's what they've given. But I heard all of that in the last debate. So what's new in this one, and why are we even asking this question about Ukraine? We asked the questions, or they asked the same questions in the last debate. So that bothered me. That bothered me quite a bit.
Okay, let me ask you this question: who had the best one-liner?
Oh gosh, I nothing really stands out. And I know there were a couple of instances where we said, "Oh, that was a great line." Rather than picking a single great line, because I think there were a handful, maybe 4 or 5 each came up with a good line, and I don't recall them all. Which probably is an indication that maybe they weren't such great lines after all, except in the context of the moment. But I will say this. I will say this, because I'm interested in hearing you have to say about this as well, Nick. But before let me just say that I do think that the individual that was the best deliverer of lines when he spoke passionately, and again, not necessarily canned answers, was Vivek Ramaswamy. He is an impressive individual. I don't know much about his background, and I'm skeptical as to whether or not he really appreciates how difficult a job it is to be president of the United States, because he's making some very big promises that it strikes me as kind of like the Donald Trump, I'm going to build a wall, and without realizing that, except that you can't build a wall without congressional funding, right? So it's these CEOs, they come into politics thinking that you can run government like a business, when the truth is you can't.
We saw that.
But his delivery, when he's on his moment, when has his moments, is very good. I
Yeah.
would put him as the top, and then I would say I have to say Chris Christie would be second place if I was rating things like that. But I'm not sure about the one line. What do you think?
Okay, first of all, I flipped that order just because of this one line. Because I like Vivek. I think he's young. He needs some polish. He needs some, but guys like him tend to rise to the challenge. So his lack of understanding, yeah, it could be an impediment in his first year or so. I'm not denying that, but I think he's got enough quality to his character that he will grow into the job. And
But you can't. It's not. That's not the problem, Nick. The problem is that he can't. When you like, for instance, I'm going to cut the federal public service by 75%. Okay, but you when you're the CEO of a company, you can do that.
Yeah.
When you're the president of the United States, you can't do that. You
Okay,
have to have the courts on side. You have to have Congress on side. You have to have the states on side, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not a question of growing into the job. It's a question of making promises that, as a practical matter, he can't possibly deliver on.
fair enough. Okay.
That's my concern.
We've seen this happen on a municipal level in the city of Ottawa under Larry O'Brien when Larry O'Brien was mayor. He went in with a business mentality and spent 2 years, he didn't waste it, the unions did, trying to take him down because of the kind of changes he wanted to put in place. So we've seen this up close and personal. The reason I would put Christie just a little ahead of Vivek, as much as I think Vivek is certainly, and look, you're right about that, but that takes somebody, about your point about him, but that takes somebody grabbing him by the shirt collar, hauling him aside and say, don't ever say that again. And here's why. Okay. He needs good people around him. So when he says something like that, it gets nipped in the bud and they can look, if he wants to say, I want to shrink the government and I'll work with different levels of government to do that. First of all, you just created a dragon. It's, multi-headed. So admit that this is not going to be easy.
Sure.
Okay. And that's part of being honest. But Christie had a line that made me laugh out loud. And it was about Donald Trump. We're going to call you Donald Duck, not Donald Trump. I would look, I got your point about Donald Trump. It rolls better off the tongue than Donald Duck does.
Sure.
But look, people, that's the one line I think you're going to see tomorrow on all the talk shows that Christie came out with that they're going to remember. It's the economy, stupid. It's, these kinds of things.
Yeah.
So we'll see. But if I'm right or not, but that's the one that I remember most clearly because it was, oh man, and most people wouldn't have the cojones to say that. But Christie doesn't seem to care.
Do you think that, would you say that there was a winner? And if yes, who would that be?
Not clearly. There wasn't anybody who landed a body blow the other guy couldn't recover from.
Right.
I would say it's a toss up between, and I like DeSantis' performance tonight was pretty good. He was a target of a lot of attacks. I thought he handled himself well. He may even get a bump in the polls over this. He's going to have to. Well, yeah, he's second overall, so he'll probably make the next cut. But if he wants to be a serious threat to Donald Trump, he has to go up in the polls. But I would say
it's still early.
And it is absolutely. I would have to say I would say probably it's a toss up between Christie and Vivek. Nikki Haley, at first I liked the way she was handling herself, but you're right, she got screechy and she got, the whole point about the drapes at the end. Okay, well, look, that was just a petty little cat fight between her and Tim Scott, which they should never have bothered with because she's right. The drapes are probably already there. What are you going to do? Return them? And again, I go back to the orange juice scandal in Canada where the minister, it was a female minister, I could see her face. Anyway, she went over and spent $11 on a glass of orange juice. And everybody was up in arms about it. But nobody ever bothered to say, well, that's what orange juice costs over there when you stay at a high quality Okay, so what are you getting all upset about? If you went, you'd pay $11 too. So it wasn't an outrageous thing. Drapes, look, if I was Nikki Haley, I would have just said, if that's what you're going to waste time on, then I have no time talking to you. There's far more important things to discuss.
And what is with those guys at Fox News that they try to do that thing at the end, the gimmick, right? Who would you vote
Yeah,
off
I
the
know.
island? Okay,
Like, and I thought, and that's where I thought DeSantis really scored some points. He
yeah,
said, "Look, I'm not going to do that. That's disrespectful."
yeah,
Yeah, and he was exactly right. Like, why? Why would you do that? This
yeah.
is something. Well, this is not a game show. This isn't Survivor. Okay, and then for Christie to jump on it and say, "Yeah, I'd vote Trump off the island." Well, he's not there. He's not on the island. What are you talking about?
Yeah. Well, again, that's a central part of his campaign.
Yeah,
Nick, what can I say? I'm
it was
looking at the
fun.
time here, and we're actually coming up to 3 hours.
Time
So
for us to say goodnight.
I think so. I think that people have had their fill of. If they haven't had their fill yet of us, they will if we keep on going. So.
The glass is brimming. Let's not flow it over.
So this was the first time we did this, and it's been fun. I don't think we interacted quite as much during the debate itself as perhaps we could have. So we'll have to think a little bit about how we can be a little bit more proactive and a little
But
bit more.
here's what I think you run into a danger. If you get too caught up in talking over the people who are answering
Right,
questions,
exactly.
the listener gets annoyed or the viewer gets annoyed because shut up, I want to hear what they have to say.
Right.
So I think from my perspective, I thought we paced it pretty well. You know what? If you're listening or watching, send us a note. Put it in the comments. We want more, ratchet that up or tone it down because we're learning on the fly here. We're going to be doing a lot more of this. So let's learn from what our audience thinks about which way is the best way to go with that.
Okay. Well, Nick, before we sign off, I'm going to do a quick ad for my show, www.josephbenamy.com, all one word without the hyphen. So check out the website. It's looking spiffy. It's, as you know, Nick,
It is.
it's a new website.
Yeah.
So I'm encouraging people to check it out. Listen, if you're watching this performance, for want of a better way of expressing it, on Rumble, whether you're watching it on the Joseph Benamy Show site or Out of Control with Nick and Joe site. We were live on both of those. Click on the like, click on follow, because that will help us grow. Tell your friends and neighbors about us. And I guess that's it, really, except to say,
in the meantime,
we will see you, at least I will see you tomorrow night at 8 o'clock regular time for the Joseph Benamy Show. And we will probably be catching you on Sunday night at our regular time of 8 o'clock on Out of Control with Nick and Joe. So that's really all I have to say. Nick, I know you have a couple of words to add.
Well, all I'm going to say is good night, and we'll see you all when you're a little bit older. In the meantime, ubi caritas et amor, Dea sibi est. Good evening, God bless. Don't let anything disturb your peace, and may you have a fair wind and a following sea.